And it looks like we're live. Good evening. I'm joined, at least initially, by Elfbait. I don't know if anybody else will be joining us, but Elfbait's here from the start tonight. Hello.
Indeed.
And a few people in chat already. In fact, there's already 10 people here. Normally there's 2 or 3 when I log in and people start filtering in about 5 past, but up to 11 now. So, good evening, Halakar. Good evening, Grumpy Old Slan. Good evening, General Nut and Mage's Musings. We've also got AB Mark II and Adam Pender. All regular names. Some of you are becoming regular voices as well. Certainly in my games I'm winning, I'm getting to know you all, and you're getting to know me, which is good. Before we get on to the topic, any gaming this last week, Elfbait?
Sadly, no. I had too low of a player count on Monday to run D&D. Closest I came was a heated discussion with my brother over other rule systems. So.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah. So.
What was he defending? What were you defending?
So, in his defense, you play what you play, you like what you like, and you like games for different reasons. He's very much a system for system's sake kind of person. Like, he loves to digest systems. So he's talking about Cortex, which looks like it has some potential. When I'm reading it, I'm going, why am I supposed to be into this? Because he's handed me all kinds of books like, hey, you should check it out. I'm like, why am I checking it out? What is this going to do for me that another game does? And that's where the discussion kind of floated around. He even threw out the dreaded grognard word.
Well, and I mean, is he old though? I mean,
he's 6 years younger than I am.
So you're the grognard,
yeah, exactly. He's like, you sound kind of grognardy. I'm like, well, F you very much, but.
God. So say hello as well to Malachi, and nice to see you at the start of the stream. Hopefully we don't make you nod off. And Omen Owl is in chat as well. Gaming. We played part 2 of our Call of Cthulhu Thursday night game last Thursday. It's a Thursday night game. Of course, we played it on Thursday, and it was very good. In fact, how many people in chat were involved in that? AB was involved in that. Mage's Musing was involved in that. General Nut was involved in that. In fact, it was General Nut's character who died, and Mage's Musings and AB have both managed to get their characters arrested. So it's not looking particularly good for tomorrow night's most likely finale. We've got one character who is a relatively okay-ish, who will probably have to try and bail them out or something. We shall see. Anyway, the Saturday night group will be running the same scenario, probably with slightly different characters though, this week. 2 people have signed up so far. Other people have expressed an interest, but it's first come, first served on places. We can have up to 5 people, and we're starting at 2:00 British time on Saturday afternoon, which I believe is about 9 a.m. American time. So it might be a bit early for some people, but we have got an Australian joining. I think it's midnight for him. AB, no, I'm pretty sure it was you who got them arrested. And General Nut, it was your character who died. And it was your choice as well. It was your choice that got you killed. Anyhow, it was a good session, and I'm thoroughly enjoying it. I hope you guys are as well. Some really good role playing. It's getting quite tense at times, and Omen Owl's off to see Rammstein. That's why he can't join us on Saturday. I'm not jealous, honest. I might have to give Owen Owl a bit of one of those chat blocks for a little while because I'm not jealous. I would love to see Rammstein. I've watched so much live footage of theirs; they're magnificent. But I think next time they come to the UK, I'll get that. That's because they put on a hell of a show. They really do. In fact, Elfbait, you strike me as being the sort of person who possibly appreciates a little bit of Rammstein.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Rammstein, anything heavy industrial or like metal, guitar rock, and honestly just about anything across the board. But Rammstein, yeah, Rammstein. I always say Rammstein, and that's because I have way too many Jewish relatives. But
Well, I learned a bit of German at school, and I believe it would be Rammstein.
oh yeah, and my dad's German, so I should know better. But yeah, it just comes out Steen all the time. Maybe it's too much Frankenstein.
So you like a bit of Nine Inch Nails and things like that?
Oh yeah. My music tastes are diverse. I mean, I also listen to a lot of new wave, 80s new wave, and I
do as well.
Had some rap in my repertoire in the past, mostly heavy political stuff or gangster rap, and back in the 80s. So
I will say now, I mean, I'm growing to learn to appreciate some of the early rap from the 80s. Your Grandmaster Flash type stuff, because I can see
the early hip hop stuff.
And when I was at university, bands like Cypress Hill and Rage Against the Machine had got that sort of crossover influence that made their stuff got played in the sort of clubs I used to hang around in, and I quite like a bit of their stuff. But beyond that, rap is not my thing.
No, it's not my number one. But yesterday I was cooking dinner and I just had a hankering for like 70s guitar rock for some reason. I'm like, hey, my wife comes in and I'm like, this is the soundtrack of my childhood. This is what all the adults in my life are listening to.
Yeah. And I mean, 80s new wave is fantastic as well. I mean, I'm into quite a few sort of mostly sort of the post-punk side of it. Joy Division, Echo and the Bunnymen, bands like that. So, and Malachi had a chance to see Nine Inch Nails when they toured with Bowie in the 90s. Yeah, that not going to that is a bit of a miss, I think. There's footage on YouTube of them performing together, and it's rather interesting. Yeah, I think that would have been a damn good gig. I saw Nine Inch Nails twice. Saw Nine Inch Nails when they toured just after the Downward Spiral was released in the early 90s, and I saw them again about 10 years ago. And their sound hadn't changed all that much, but he has. He's actually got a bit of weight on his bones nowadays, which is he looks very unhealthy.
Middle age will do that for you.
Well, and not being on heroin will do that for you as well.
That is also true.
Yes. Anyhow, I think we are here to talk games, aren't we?
Possibly.
Yes. Oh, speaking of, I ran a game of AD&D on Saturday night, and I played in my friend's 5th edition game on Monday. My AD&D game on the Saturday night is coming towards a finale, UK4, When a Star Falls. They begin the final chapter of it this Saturday. Not this Saturday, next Saturday. Whether it's 1 or 2 sessions left, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, my D&D game keeps getting delayed. And I'm like, you guys got to get together so we can play, because there's a Temple to Orcus that you have to beat down. So,
is it a homemade Temple of
Orcus? Yeah, homebrew. Right. There's an ogre who has gained the favor of Orcus, and he's got a mountain stronghold. Yes, so
good. Right. Anyway, we're going to talk about the idea of player skill versus character skill, and parts of the game that are influenced by people's views on that, and the balance and how mechanics affect that balance. Because I mean, in the process of putting together ideas for a video, and I wanted to sort of compare side by side the first edition Tomb of Horrors and the 5th edition Tomb of Horrors, and see how the mechanics would behave differently in the adventure, and with a view to trying to fix the 5th edition version to make it, because I personally think it's possibly the worst conversion imaginable for 5th edition. So I'm giving that is a spoiler already as to my opinion on that one. No, we can't do anything Major's musings. But good to see everyone chatting about music. Everyone's it's like being in the pub, isn't it? Without the beer. Hello, Michael Stronghold. I saw you in DM James's feed, his stream earlier. No, I haven't looked at the Return to the Tomb of Horrors box set because, as far as I'm concerned, there is only one proper Tomb of Horrors, and that's the original S1 played using first edition rules. But if you tell me it's worth looking at Return to Tomb of Horrors, I will do. But only tell me if it's worth looking, if it's true that it's worth looking. Don't troll me.
Was a cool bit of crafting that was done on, I think, Wylock's Armory, I think it was, where he pretty much built the entire Tomb of Horrors for miniature scale to the 1-inch grid for D&D. He built room by room, hallway by hallway, trap for trap, handcrafted the whole thing. It was crazy.
Now, normally so I'm going to come across, I'm going to mention in this sort of player skill versus character skill is the idea of playing on a theatre of the mind and that sort of stuff. Tomb of Horrors, I think, is one of the few adventures that I don't think it matters whether you play on a grid or theatre of the mind, because it is such an analytical adventure in the way the players have to approach it.
Yeah.
And they've got to be very, very thorough, and they've got to examine every last square inch of the place.
I would imagine running it in 3D with miniatures and built terrain would just be an upgrade on the illustration booklet that they gave.
Yeah, very possibly. And I think, and it's normally, I think if I turn up to a game and there's all this 3D terrain everywhere, it would immediately turn me off. But if it turned out to be an adventure like Tomb of Horrors, where it's not so much about the imagination running away with you and the role-playing side of it, it's more about the analyzing, then I think it would work. I really do think that would work. Yeah, I agree. Omanal says they're painting the walls. Yeah, doing all those frescoes in that first corridor would be an absolute nightmare.
That's what printers are for. There's some really good old tricks for model railroading. If you can print out the graphics and then you can sandpaper the paper to make it really thin to where it lays on the walls, and then you can always dry brush over it. I'm a miniatures guy also, so well, for me it's just like
talking about crafting and stuff. A friend of mine has got quite a decent sized channel where he talks about crafting and building sort of 2.5D type dungeon parts, pieces, and furniture and that sort of stuff. And I keep meaning to invite him on because I think it'd be somebody who'd be interesting to chat to. On the Wednesday stream. So I'll need to invite him and ask him, because those of you who are into making stuff, he would be someone to talk to. He's got a very creative mind, and he's incredibly humble about it. The amount of times he said, "Oh, I'm not very good at painting. I'm not very good at painting," or whatever, and he pulls out some figures, and it's just like, huh?
Yeah, I mean, I paint for table standard. I don't paint for competition. That's if I ever get around to painting stuff.
He claims he doesn't paint for competition standard, but if you've ever, I mean, on his blog, he's got pictures of things he's painted, and they're stunning. They're so beautiful.
I will engage every painting cheat I can find to get my stuff done.
Yeah, yeah. I haven't quite learned enough painting cheats yet. In fact, I need to get back into painting. It's something I've neglected in recent years is my painting.
Well, now that I have my space set up behind me and everything, and like that's my painting table right behind me, but
Well, if I had my own room in the house, apart from just a corner in the bedroom, then I'd probably be exactly the same. But all my paints are
yeah.
stuck up under the eaves of my roof, and I have to go up there and heat the place up and get the light going in there. And it's a pain in the ass.
That's funny is that shows up so often in the various UK streamers, and over here, I don't know if our attics are just different, but I don't know of many people who actually have space enough or would even dare go into their attic space to do anything.
If you our house, I mean, the house I live in it's a mid terrace, so we've got neighbours directly either side, which means we've got no sort of alleyways or anything down the side. We haven't got a garage or anything like that. But what we do have is an attic space which has got vertical roofs at either end. So we had it boarded, and I've got a pool table up there, dartboard, and
So
a lot
you
of
finished
storage.
the space.
Yeah, it's not. By no means finished. It's quite roughly done, but it's carpeted and boarded, and I've got a desk up there, and a lot of our storage space in our house is under the eaves of where the roof does slope, which is the front and the back. So, but once things disappear to there, they rarely come out.
Yeah, the pitch on the ceiling at my house is just way too gradual to ever entertain standing under it, let alone yeah. I mean, you might be able to store stuff up there, but there's no way it'd be usable space. But I have a basement, so
we don't have a basement. I mean, yeah. I might be able to inherit my daughter's room when she moves out. Not that I'm trying to force her to move out or anything, but she got a job this week. She started her first day at work this week, so she's not on enough to even consider moving out. But it's an apprenticeship, and it's a great thing for her future. I mean, she turned 18 in the summer, and it's a real step towards adulthood.
That is
but
cool.
It is, and I might use the attic for my recording and streaming and stuff in the near future if I can get my computer reconfigured up there. But I'm not sure the wireless extends up there very well. Hello to a few more people. We haven't even gotten to the topic properly yet. Hello, Shadow and Sun. Haven't seen you on one of my streams before. I've encountered you on other people's streams, but nice to see you here. Right. So, skill-based games, player skill versus character skill. Where do you fall on the whole topic of player skill versus character skill, Elfbait?
I'm of two minds. On one hand, I really feel that at least the cerebral parts of role playing really should be attempted based on player skill. Otherwise, you're missing out on most of what we as people sitting around a table can really do. But from a mechanical standpoint, I have a hard time rationally expecting somebody to be able to perform at mental levels that we don't expect anybody to perform at physical levels for you. Like nobody sitting around, well, not nobody, most people sitting around the table, again, around a gaming table, are not physically as capable as their paladin or their barbarian or anything like that, or even their thief in terms of agility. I mean, I would fall and stab myself in the eye with my thieves tool if I was trying to stealth my way around a dungeon.
Remember a couple of weeks ago, you've just used stealth as a verb.
You're right.
Smack yourself on the wrist. Anyway, continue.
But no, really, just it's. I think you're robbing yourself of some fun if you're not at least trying to work it out in your head. But realistically, all players are not created equal, and some players have characters that are much more capable than they are. And I think that a balance is essential there. You have You have to find that balance point. I would ask people, even if they can't figure it out themselves, at least try to act their way through the motions of it. Like in an investigative game, at least tell me you're searching the room, and that you're searching for hidden panels or something like that, even though you as a real person would not necessarily know what to look for. Go through the motions. At least then you're putting some effort into it. Don't just die drop it and go. But sometimes that's all you can do. But at least play it out.
I'm probably similar to you in that sense. Is I want to see a willingness from the players to try to solve something before resorting to the dice. I think that's the key for me. You have got to. It's how's the best? How you've got to try to portray your character as best as possible, but balance it out with the idea that you are actually playing a game, and part of the game is the players engaging with the game, the mechanics and environment, and balance it out between the characters doing the engagement and the players doing the engagement. It's not 100% player. It's not 100% character. It's a bit of both. And I think Shadow and Son said it here. It should be an amalgamation of the two.
Yeah. The flip side of that is I would absolutely expect a fighter to put a little bit more into his fighting than I hit it with my sword.
Yes.
So it's not just going towards the mental side of things. I really would expect the physical characters to, tell me that your barbarian lifting the gate is gritting his teeth and straining his muscles, and
yes. Yes.
Give me your best Schwarzenegger impression as you lift it. Blah!
And let's have the fighters shouting out challenges and
or insults or battle cries.
Insults, intimidation, all that sort of stuff. Stand up there and say, have them demand, let's solve this with a drinking contest. Those sort of little snippets that bring the character to life, rather than just, as you say, do I roll the D20? I've just rolled a 1.
That's it.
There we go.
You critical failed the stream. You're
Yeah. Okay, bye. But I do feel as though there was a little bit of a shift in gaming, because I think back to when I first started playing. We're going back to AD&D 83, 84, 85, 86. And as teenagers, we couldn't give a monkeys about metagaming.
Oh, no. I still barely care about it.
It was a case of, it didn't matter what characters we were playing. Oh, they're rock clubs, burn them. Didn't matter. We didn't care. And at some point, the idea of metagaming became a very dirty word. I don't know where that happened, or whether it happens naturally to gamers with age.
I think it happens to people in general. As you get older, you just want things to make sense.
Yeah. But I certainly started. I started playing with a 5th edition group about 10 years ago, 9 years ago. Just after 5th edition came out, and they were younger and a lot more inexperienced than me, and they'd already got the idea that metagaming was a bad thing and were trying not to do it.
I think it's a message that's broadcast, though, nowadays. And back when we were doing it, there was no internet, and so they've got 18 billion streams, not just live play streams, but how to play D&D streams, telling them that metagaming is wrong. The entire game is a metagame. I mean, the basic concessions of an RPG are all meta. So getting overly hung up on meta seems a waste of time.
And I mean, if you think back to certainly the AD&D days, how many of those adventures were tournament modules? And in a tournament environment, you were supposed to metagame. Those adventures were designed to test the players who were sat at that table.
I mean, hell,
There was
Gygaxian dungeons are pure meta, because you're looking at a dungeon going, okay, well, I'm just conceding that these monsters all live in this place because
yeah.
Gygax put it in there. There's no logical reason. I mean, at least early on, they started getting, dungeon ecologies later on down the road. But, that whole basic concept of a dungeon is, why is there this assortment of hallways and chambers in the middle of nowhere for no good reason?
Yeah, and I think part of the shift, I think, is losing the idea of the tournament dungeon, and losing the idea of having however many groups at a convention competing with identical parties, identical characters, strictly by the rules as much as possible for a prize to see whoever gets the furthest through this insane labyrinth that is impossibly hard.
Yeah, wins. I think in all practicality, I mean, tournament dungeons are almost have to be played on high meta, just Absolutely. Because you only have maybe 2 hours or whatever it is to play them at the tournament, or at the convention, So you kind of strip it down, but yeah,
I mean they're at the extreme end of the player skill side of things, and I think by the time we got to sort of third edition AD&D, when third edition D&D, when you got this big long list of skills, the whole game shifted. Sorry, I'm bashing my microphone. The whole game shifted towards that. That's the point where we shifted towards character skill being dominant. The player skill then became the character creation part of it.
Yeah, the earliest footfalls of that probably happened in second edition.
Well, late second edition.
Yeah, when you started getting the non-weapon proficiencies in there.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, non-weapon proficiencies to me added a little bit of flavour at the side of the game. I didn't have people try to cheese them. But I think the player's options books, certainly towards the end of second edition, started to introduce the idea that you could really build, I hate that term as well, build a character. And then third edition just took it by the horns and went, off we go.
Yeah. Third edition skill list is huge. And in a skill-based game, I would love that. But trying to put a skill-based skill list on D&D is just ridiculous. So,
yeah, but there are games. I mean, I've said many, many times how much I love Call of Cthulhu, and I will say it again. And that is a skill-based game.
Yeah, but that's a game built to be one. From the core.
But yeah, I don't see people approach that with a character skill mindset. It's very that yes, they role play their characters, and yes, they use their character skills, but success and failure in Call of Cthulhu largely depends on player skill. It's the player's ability to pick up on clues. And somebody, I think it was Omanal, was mentioning that earlier. That's one thing I did want to come to, the idea of the investigation. And
I think investigative games appeal to and attract a different kind of player, whereas D&D is sort of seen as the Swiss Army knife of RPGs. Call of Cthulhu probably has a smaller player base. I know it has a smaller player base, but very likely because of the kind of player it's attracting.
Yes, generally older players and the Japanese, as far as I know,
and Spain, I think too.
Is it big? I didn't know it was big in Spain.
Yeah, there's actually a Spanish director who's done a couple of Netflix or series that have made it to Netflix and other streaming services. He is a huge Call of Cthulhu fan, and player, and has evidently written some stuff for it. But he did the 30 Coins series, where in like the first season he drops the yellow sign in the background like 3 times. But even though the whole series seems to be more steeped in like Christian mythology, the visuals are very Lovecraftian. So
but God, I didn't know that about Spain, so fair play to them. The Spaniards have got it right. So I mean, I've already belted through my first four points on my sheet. We're absolutely flying. We're only half hour in and spent half of that talking nonsense. I know nothing about the topic whatsoever. Saxius, I would say, let people know Saxius isn't joining us tonight. He's got internet issues. I believe he's moved house and still got to set up his internet.
Yeah. That's what he was saying, I think, last week.
Yes, so we have to wait for the return of the muse that is Saxius when it comes to this. Right, Major's Musings. Speaking of muse, Major's Musings, you need to do a new video because I've watched all your videos. I've completely caught up at work. So I want to know what happens to that group, especially that evil group who are playing Night Below, because they are deliciously nasty. Anyway, like many aspects of the game, there needs to be a balance of the two. Puzzles I have meant for players must be solved by players, but something like a chess match could. Right. If I was to throw a chess match game in there, I would actually be tempted to play that out. Because I do lean a little bit towards. I know you're not meant to do this nowadays, but I lean a little bit towards if you're not really how to phrase this without insulting everybody. I'm going to be blunt. Don't play a really intelligent character if you've got an IQ of under 80. I think that's the best way to say it. I like to play characters typically with a high intelligence and a low wisdom because that suits me. I've got a very analytical mind when it comes to solving things, but I make bad decisions, and that's how I've been all my life. I suppose it's easy for me to play that sort of character, and if I was to then turn around and play somebody who was very stupid but who came out with pearls of wisdom, I might get frustrated, and I probably wouldn't do it very long, but it would knock me out of my comfort zone for a while because that just isn't the way I tend to play the games. I tend to make very snap decisions, not very wise decisions, but I love puzzles and I love burying my head in a mystery and trying to solve things. So I like playing old mages and characters that dabble with. I don't know. I mean, if I play Call of Cthulhu, I typically play a professor type. If I play D&D, I prefer to play mage types, often rogue rogue characters thieves who are going to have to get through on their intelligence, their smarts. But I do like having that side of the character where I make silly choices, makes bad decisions, and that's the lack of wisdom. So I like to approach this as dear. I am rambling, I'm really rambling, but I would love to play a chess match against a player as part of a game, me versus the player or me versus the players. And I'm more likely to allow physical characters to escape something with a roll because that's you don't just go, okay, we're going to arm wrestle for this because most of us aren't going to be very good at that. Yeah, anyway, I know that clashes with something you said earlier. Anyway,
no, it's I think the other thing to consider too is that the DM is at a distinct advantage when it comes to that whole argument of player versus because the DM, his monsters, his traps, his puzzles can do anything, and he doesn't have to prove it on a character sheet, and he doesn't have to produce the receipts to show that he knows this or and often as the DM you're sort of on it, at least in my experience, you're on a different level of commitment to the subject matter than a lot of your players. I probably spend way more time in my away from table time just watching, reading, listening to things and pulling ideas from things, whether that's a murder mystery or history or, some video on paleontology that I decided to sit there and lose myself into. But, it's so yeah, I mean, you have to take that into account too, because the DM gets to be all character skill basically. If you think about it, he can just sit there and say the ceiling falls in, take X amount of damage. He doesn't have to worry about, was the ceiling actually framed properly? Was it up to code? How long had it been sitting there? What kind of water damage had it had?
Yeah.
So yeah.
So I mean, I do get the gripe about you are not your character, though. I mean, but I do have the approach of sometimes tough. I want to see my players engage with the environment, and yes, they might end up solving something with a roll eventually, but I want to see them try and them solve it first, and at least. And back to what Omanal said before here, the DM should allow multiple ways of solving the same puzzle. I think this is key, and I'm gonna bring up Monday's game here, in that we're playing the what is that kickstarted Greek themed 5th edition game adventure. Oh, what's it called? I can't remember. I can't remember the name of it straight off the top of my head. I should remember, because I played it 2 days ago. But there's a section I did a video on a while back, and we finally concluded it, and it's about a sacrifice, and there's a group in the city who are demanding this sacrifice takes place, and we eventually got to the point where 2 members of our party offered to put themselves up for sacrifice, and the other 3 of us refused. And the DM did give us opportunities to change our mind. And then the 2 who had offered to be sacrificed wandered forward. We had already killed the creatures that were supposed to carry out the sacrifice, so we thought they were going to be safe. And then after a while, some more creatures attacked, but the DM had placed guards stopping those of us who refused to be sacrificed, preventing us from interfering. So we tried to come up with loads and loads of ways of trying to distract the guards, get them to change their minds, get them to think that, oh, this sacrifice is stupid, it shouldn't go ahead. And we came up with loads and loads of ideas, and they were pretty much all just vetoed. It was a case of, you've had your chance. You're going to sit and watch what happens now, and watch the other 2 party members fight. Now, he's a fairly new DM, and I think if I was in the same situation running that, I would have allowed something to work to allow the 3 who were sat out of it to get a bit more involved.
Yeah.
But there was a wall there effectively preventing us. And yes, it's down to a decision that we'd made earlier, and he had telegraphed the decision a little bit, so we could have made a different choice. But that's just talking about that game. It was still a decent session. It was still good fun. I'm just going to welcome DK to the server. I didn't think DK was joining us tonight. Hello, DK.
Hello. Sorry, I was working late. That's why I said I might miss it. I apologize. I wasn't specified.
That's okay. So I'm going to throw you straight in at the deep end, DK. We've both given our general opinions on the idea of player skill versus character skill.
Right.
What's yours?
Okay. So My general idea of player skill versus character skill, it comes down to, if I can be a bit glib, what's the IQ level of your player? I mean that glibly, but also in the sense that if your players need to look down at their powers and not say their equipment or their ability to think tactically or negotiate, then you have players who are basically build monkeys who think that if you can just min-max or build your way into a proper class structure, like the perfect combination to cover all angles, then you're not dealing with, like, I would say, like, very innovative thinkers, people who can adapt very easily, because most players who know, like from the old school, who know that I as an individual cannot cover all bases. That's why we form a team. But
Yes.
players in the new school who build think that they can cover all angles, and then they get really upset when their build doesn't solve the immediate problem that's directly in front of them, and then they blame the DM for their misinterpretation of the expectations of the game. And I think that is the fundamental problem of player skill versus character skill.
I'm glad to say I've not seen that personally at the table, but I have read a lot of stories about that sort of thing. Now, obviously, you take some of these stories online with a bit of a pinch of salt, but I've seen enough stories along those lines to say, yeah, well, that those sort of players certainly exist. I mean, I don't know if you've caught what we've been saying on the stream, but my general approach is I do prefer intelligent players to play intelligent characters. But my approach towards puzzle solving is very much of I want the players to try and solve it first. And eventually, if they do draw a blank, then I will allow rolls to come in later on. But I want the players to engage with it first.
Yes. Yeah, it is kind of sad, though, that it's like there was like, 'cause even I kind of when I started in the hobby, when I started with 5e, even I built characters with these kinds of contingencies in mind. And the funny thing was, when I actually got to play these characters, like say a paladin who had like thief skills and deception, that he was playing a more dubious character, I never actually got to pick locks or anything like that, so they were redundant skills. I just ended up playing the standard archetype of the paladin. So it was almost like, it was kind of, yeah, and to be honest, I think I went in half expecting that it might come up, so I had guarded my expectations a little bit. But even the fact that I went into it doing this means that there was kind of a problem. That's why I prefer games that foster niche protection. Like, smart things are for the wizard, combat is for the fighter, stealth is for the thief, and the undead is for the cleric. That's their job. And I like it when the game fosters that kind of division of labor, because it allows everyone to shine at other times, because we're a team.
Of course. And it's the whole building idea then is building a party rather than building a character.
Mm-hmm.
And building a party is all part of AD&D in terms of its preparation. It's all part of preparation. Having the right characters going on an adventure it was in original Gygaxian AD&D. It was expected that the players would try and put a party together that would cover these bases.
Here's a question.
Mm-hmm.
How much of the discrepancy between player skill and character skill necessity leaning towards the mental side of things, the cerebral side of things, has to do with the expected player base when the game was first created? The fact that the game was kind of the realm of smart, bookish nerd guys or esoteric, stoner dudes, I think may have informed the game design to a degree. Because going back to that whole like nobody expects you to fight like your fighter or lift like your barbarian, but they somehow expect you to be able to think like to think your way through all the thinky parts.
I'm just going to cross out the next bullet pointed thing on my sheet, which says, "We were nerds. It suited our brains."
See, no. Here's the thing. I can actually answer that, because with combat, like you're saying, you don't expect to fight as well as your fighter. Well, that's because, and this is going to sound kind of sacrilegious to the grognards here, but combat is to me, and in my observation, is it's like I agree with like what Pundit would say, that the things you give rules for are the least important things in the game. Like some people would say, because combat has lots of rules, it is important, and things that have basically the whole thing of, if it has lots of rules, it's important, or if it's important, you should have lots of rules. Whereas I'm like, no, you give lots of rules to combat because you want to get it over with as fast as possible, and it's the role play that's important. That's
the intention was to get it over as soon as possible. They failed with D&D.
I suppose. Yeah, well.
Because they could have just done a rock, paper, scissors and called it good,
I know, but they had to cover all angles, man. It's nobody's perfect, and like Geek said, we're a lot of nerds are slightly autistic. So, I mean,
I really think that first of all, the wargaming roots of the game show heavily in what is written and what isn't written into the game.
Oh yeah,
and I think the player base informed that as well. Your early player base is going to be, whether they're college kids or smart nerds or retirees or whatever, who armchair generals, armchair historians, that generally speaking, when the game came out, and for the first few decades it was out, or a couple decades it was out, it wasn't really the realm of the jock or the party girl or anything like that. It was the nerd. Not saying that they can't be smart, because I've met them and they are, but the thing is that you're not going to feel the need to put that into the game if you expect it to be there already. Whereas there does absolutely need to be some sort of combat resolution system.
Oh yeah,
because you just can't leave that up to the DM either. You can't just sit there and say,
but that's the thing. That's the point that I was going to drive at, is that combat is heavily abstracted. I like we like that was kind of the point that I was getting at. We abstract it to kind of get away from too much of the nitty gritty. Like with if we were to be as realistic as possible, armor would not prevent you from being hit. It would absorb damage, right? That was its original purpose. But we don't do that because it's just easier to say, oh, you have to hit a target number to actually do damage. Do you know what I mean? So, but we don't get rid of the social aspects or the problem-solving aspect, because they're infinitely more interesting and infinitely more fulfilling, I think, for the players. So that's why you don't abstract those things out, because that's what nerds tend to want to do more. But will I ever cut out combat though? Probably not, because it's, like you said, the wargaming roots makes it too essential. But
and I mean, a good game will have changes of pace in it, and good combat provides drama.
Yes,
well, and there are RPGs that have so abstracted combat to where it is a single die roll to figure out how the entire combat goes.
I don't agree with that though. So
well, I get where I'm going with that is that if the goal was to create a system that reflected what was important in the game and what wasn't, those games usually do that because combat isn't important.
Right.
It's you're just you're literally wanting to get through it as fast as you can, but you still need it to matter to some degree. D&D parts that out a lot.
D&D had those three pillars, didn't it? It had those three pillars:
combat, exploration, and problem solving.
Exactly.
One of them just happens to be 10 feet in diameter, and the other are 2.
I will say though, I didn't say. To be fair, maybe it was a clumsiness of mine. I didn't say. What I meant to say was, I'm not saying combat isn't important. I just said it was the least important of the three, at least as far as the kind of games that I run.
Yeah,
because I like combat to be fairly deadly and fast.
I've played in your games, and we spend most of the time
shooting the shit.
Yeah, basically. Yes. Yeah. Right. I do need to catch up with comments.
Yeah.
Because I've looked. So far. I'm 26 minutes behind on the comments in where I'm reading. So I'm just going to bring up a few of them and just have a quick, very quickly. Adam here says something about 5th edition teaching players to play the character sheet. I think that started really with third edition. They really
or late
started
2.5. You could even argue.
Yeah, I did mention that earlier, but but 3rd edition was when it really took off.
Oh yeah, by third, yeah.
But we've got quite a core in the hobby who have started with that, who expect to play in that way, and they've continued into 5th edition. I've generally found that 5th edition, they don't play the character sheet quite as much, as long as I push other pillars in the game. But if there's a lot of combat, then they do resort to the character sheet.
Yeah, I mean, my players don't play the character sheet all that well, at least, even if, because I mean, they get lost in their sheets. There's just too much going on there. They've had magic items for 5 levels that they keep forgetting about. So, because it's buried in all their other character abilities, their racial abilities, their class abilities, their background abilities. I'm like, and I'm not gonna throw it out there. I'm just gonna sit there and go, please use this sword that gives you mirror image.
Mirror image? Nice. I never thought to do something like that. That sounds sweet.
It does mirror image once a day and blink twice a day.
Oh, I'm jealous, man. That sounds fucking awesome.
Hello, Graham.
It's only a short sword.
Graham's
hello there. How are you all?
Fine, good. Thank you, Graham. Nice to see you. Nice to see you.
Thank you, and to you all as well.
I will come to your opinions on this subject when I've dealt with at least 10 minutes worth of chat. So we were talking about Spain and Call of Cthulhu. I have never learned any Spanish. La Lamada de Cthulhu y otros relatos, I think you pronounce that. I have no idea what it means. Maybe AB can let us know at some point. Let's have a little look.
I bet you it just comes out to Call of Cthulhu.
Probably.
Mark Hoffman says here, there's a lot of things where the player needs to play using in-universe knowledge. And yes, you can have roles for that sort of thing. I think that's the sort of thing we were sort of leaning on, where you give your players as much chance to solve it, but obviously sometimes they can't. So you do have to fall back on rolls sometimes. And yeah, of course, we don't know how to defuse a nuclear bomb, but if as a DM you create that bomb defusal, you could put an opportunity for them to find a hint to a bomb defusal code somewhere in the adventure as a reward, and thus it give them the opportunity to use that code that they found somewhere by beating somebody, solving another puzzle, or whatever. Doesn't that make it so much more satisfying?
Either that, or I would like the player to go, "Hey, my character was, with the city police back in the 70s, and is there any chance that he might have had da-da-da?" And if you're playing Call of Cthulhu, you're like, "All right, luck roll me."
Yeah.
I mean,
and then and that way they're actually putting themselves into it. They're adding to the story. They're playing it out.
Yeah.
I've had it happen in my Call of Cthulhu game. My guy was in the Great War. Would he have known how to do such and such? As long as it includes anything that would have been involved in dying slowly in mud and then being terrified to go over the top, sure.
But it's the player there injecting something into the game,
exactly,
to help with the problem, rather than just saying, "Can I roll dice to solve this?"
I'd like to stealth my way through there.
Yeah,
that was for you.
Let's have a little look. I'm just looking. Oh yes, it is. Yeah, and we've mentioned this earlier. If the players come up with a reasonable solution, the DM should be willing to allow it. Yes, and it is odd to see the Dragon Lords.
Yeah, and I will say with the caveat that when they say reasonable, like reasonable could be reasonable. Like how would you define reasonable? Reasonable to the DM or like within the parameters of this fictional world? Because like a DM could say, "Oh yeah, that seems reasonable." Probably on the bias that he doesn't want his players to die. But if it doesn't make sense in the world, would that be satisfying? You know what I mean?
No, and I don't think that's what he's talking about there. I mean,
Okay.
it's kind of going back to what I was saying. If you want to, or the bomb diffuser thing. If he's saying, would I have known something about this from my background?
Right.
And you're like, you were a comic shop owner. You might know that there is such a thing as a red wire and a green wire, but you don't know how they work.
No, quite. And this is going back to where about party creation. I think things are a little bit back to front at the moment, in that the emphasis should be on the players to put the party together to solve the DM's adventure.
Yeah, they should seek things. They should be proactive. Players should be proactive.
Yeah.
It's
the current wisdom is all about like telling your DM what you want in the game, and that's cool. Except for I think there's an unspoken follow up on that, which is, and then you should expect to get it, and that's where that kind of comes from. With players expecting the DM to cater the game to their abilities. It's like, my character has the noble background. Why hasn't it come up in two levels of adventuring? Well, because you're out in the boonies and
and every time and any time we go to a city, you never go to the noble house ever, or talk to the local politicians or the church.
That's a good point.
Ever.
Talk to my players about that all the time. Like, if you have background stuff that you want to come up, make it happen.
Because I've got too much stuff to worry about as a DM. Like, come on.
If you want to see give me a brilliantly illustrated Seth Skorkowski has in one of his videos a skit done with his character. Yeah, he has that skit with the Traveler players. It's too bad there's no Omicrons in this bar. The DM knows how much I hate Omicrons, and then they have the variant version is like going in. I'm gonna look around and see if there's any Omicrons in this.
In my opinion, that's probably Seth's best video. The one where he's basically Go on, DK.
He also did another one where like the player said he wanted to be a master of disguise, and he goes to a village and they spend 2 hours trying to fucking solve. And then he goes, "Oh yeah, do you want a clue? Do you want a clue, man? Look at your character sheet. Oh yeah, I've got like 5 points in like disguise kit." It's
exactly, because we're gonna sneak through the sewers, and then we're gonna like make an imprint of the key, and then
like 2 sessions later, they forgot they had the key.
That video from Seth about how this should be up to the players to bring their character's background and present it as an opportunity for people at the table to interact with, especially the DM. That's the way it should be done. It should be the onus shouldn't be on the DM to be constantly tailoring things to the player background. It should be the player's job to bring the background.
Players to worry about. I mean,
exactly.
Yeah, and a world and the dungeons and all the encounter and the XP and the treasure. Man, that's too much work.
I tell you, if you're going to expect me to do that, you better engage with my world building. Then also, if you're gonna, if we're gonna go that far, if you're gonna expect me to do that, I expect you to go and sit there and happily listen to my 30-minute diatribe on the temple of such and such.
Exactly, it's a two-way thing. Adam says here, is it meta DMing for the trap or puzzle to be tailored to the party and not to the denizens of the dungeon? I will never tailor. If I'm writing creating a trap, it will always be tailored towards the denizens of the dungeon. That's the whole point of the trap, and it's up to the player to deal with it.
Like kobolds like will create false tops over traps that will be catered to their weight, but not to anyone else. And I think that is absolutely fair game, because that's exactly what kobolds would do.
Halflings could probably run over it. Gnomes,
or gnomes. Yeah, gnomes and halflings, and maybe dwarves if they're not in plate armor. But anyone else? Nah.
Like anything, there's room for variation. I mean, the kobolds may be in an ancient temple where there is also a magical trap that is well beyond their ability that they just haven't sprung. But
yeah, but
I'm almost
I think our guest was trying to say something.
Yeah, because Omen Owl is waiting to join us. Does that mean this stream's going to go on till 2 in the morning?
Hey, he just asked if he can join.
Yeah, of course, Omen Owl could join. But I am going to let Graham talk about his idea of balance first.
Yes.
So Omen Owl, you can have to wait your turn, but you can come in. Here you go. You're all right, Omen Owl. Graham, then. Okay, what's your let's give you a chance to have a say. What's your opinion on player skill versus character skill?
I think if we're talking about traps, I think we were talking about the kobolds. Well, that's exactly the kind of traps that kobolds would set, because they're relatively weak in a against in combat. And then you would, on the other hand, you would play as a DM, you would play intelligent creatures creating intelligent traps. So as long as it fits the story. From the player side, you've got to really make the most of the player's background, and it's probably at lower levels, it's probably more to do with the background rather than the actual skills, which will probably develop at later levels. So I think players shouldn't be afraid of trying a few skills and failing at them at early levels, and then sowing the seeds for future progression. Well, when there will be a better percentage chance to make those skills effective. So, like you're saying, it is a little bit. It's a two-way process. If you're DMing and you can see the players are really trying to engage, then there might be a little bit more leeway.
An example of a potential trap fitting the environment in our When a Star Falls game last Saturday, that test of faith, that was a potentially deadly trap, but it fitted the environment in that there was a sage that had walled himself up in a safe place, and that trap is there as a test of faith to reach him. That was a good one for me, because I happen to know as a player that my role was going to be at a slight disadvantage, but I tried to role play it out and say, you lot go first. I'm gonna use a rope, and just to give it a little bit more flavor, really. Because your character would have been nervous, knowing that it was mental skills that were, and strength of character that were getting people across, and your character is a little lacking in those particular statistics. Yeah. That's absolutely fine. What else was I was thinking also, when ideally you would have a well balanced party, or this is one of the reasons for having characters in a party that have a range of skills that are different, complementary, and not all the same. Ideally, you want an adventure that's going to test all of those, test the skills that are in the party, but it can't be too obvious. A little bit what you were saying, Elfbait was saying. Sometimes it's difficult to, lose track of various magic items. Well, it's what combination to use them, and what they're good for in certain circumstances as well. And if the that's part of the finding out of the players and the party, to find out what will work in what circumstances and what won't. And there's no harm in trying something, and then it turns out it doesn't it's not effective. Exactly. Anyways, welcome, Obanal. You've been streaming quite heavily this last week or so. I keep seeing you crop up on all sorts of streams.
Oh yeah, I mean, so there's that. Well, I mean, it's great talking to you guys because you want to talk about mental stimulation, which I think is part of the reason that I loved playing these games as a kid. Was you can go for the tactical aspect, which I enjoy learning from the war game, but I also remember reading all the little, because you're talking about the fantasy fighting stuff and all that. I also remember them having their little puzzles, and it says to turn to page such and such. If you didn't solve it right, your character just died. Now, I'm not saying I like that binary aspect, but I loved those things because even if I didn't get them, I remember flipping through the book for each individual section until I saw the answer. Like, well, how does that work? And then I'd have to work backwards to solve it. So I think there's that aspect of whenever we talk about it, if I give everything to the players, they'll feel cheated and they'll just go, I'll just roll. And it doesn't mean anything. Well, at that point, why am I spending my valuable time trying to find puzzles and ciphers and, riddles for them? Why don't I just say, just roll and we'll move on? Because obviously it's not important in that aspect. But the other part was, and this is what you were mentioning, is one is I don't want to play a game of chess. If I want to play a game of chess, we'll play a game of chess. We aren't going to play this in D&D and stop the whole game. But what I would probably do, because there are a lot of famous things, is I might hand the players, and I would do it in different ways, which is always interesting, is that if you have higher stat ability, I would make the puzzles much easier. Or I would give a lot of hints. So you can still get that. But now you're going over like, okay, first you try. All right. I'm not saying everyone has to get it, but okay, you're getting close. Let me give you a hint. Anyone that's ever done those puzzle rooms or whatever they're called, the where you go in and they have all these different puzzles in there and you're trying to solve within an hour. I can say this much, having gone with two people when it was intended for 8, you fail kind of miserably because there's a certain expectation that you need enough brain power together and people seeing things from a different escape rooms, as Mar Huckman said, from in there to figure out how to do things. And I was like, oh, okay. And there's, that's also people searching through stuff. There's always a time aspect. So like for the chess, I might say, you know what? You have 2 moves. What 2 moves you're going to do to put this person in checkmate? And then if they have a lower intelligence, what 3 moves will it take to put this person in checkmate? So it makes it much harder. They're more likely to make the wrong answer. And that's the way that I would do that. So it speeds it up. But, you can find a lot of stuff online, which makes it very easy to flip something up and say, okay, you can get checkmate in 2 moves. Show me those 2 moves. And then that will determine whether you win. And then you can find one and say, okay, here's one for 3 moves because you're not quite as smart. And then here's one for 5. And unless the player is really bright, it's like, and by the way, you have a time limit. You put a timer down. So now they're stressed. And I think that that's a way of giving them the benefit of having both high stats and having the feeling of accomplishment if they get it right. That's one. The other one is
that feeling of accomplishment is, to me, I get if I solve a puzzle in a game, it's a feeling, and my brain can't sort of envisage playing without them. I don't want to break them down to roles. I want to solve them because I know the satisfaction that comes from solving them.
So there was that one. The other one I like to do when you were talking about this, and I'll tell you this much, is I just bought this as a fluke and it just happened to come up. I've been reading through this book the past couple of days. This is actually a really cool book. What I've read so far. I've only read probably 10 or 15 pages and flipped through several others. It's got riddles. It's got some ciphers in there. It's got traps. And it gives you like different things to go through. And I love those. Not that I want to get everything in there. But, there's that one. There's the other aspects of, I'm an engineer, so I can do a lot of stuff with math. Well, that's not necessarily fair because some people are not math people. And for me to go, like I saw one in there that says Fibonacci sequence. I said, well, first off, Fibonacci sequence would not be known by almost any player during that time. So for me to use that would be, hey, do I have math majors? Well, if I have math majors, I don't have any problems doing stuff like that.
Or Tool fans.
So for Shadow and Sun, it's called The Game Master's Book of Traps, Puzzles, and Dungeons by Jeff Ashworth. And they have stuff for 5e, but I like that book for it. But then the other part is, and this is what you didn't read it, but I had it in there about the Gordian knot. You can use your skill in knot tying, intelligence, and dexterity to solve it. And I put a really high DC, which makes it almost impossible. Or your first level character can hit it with an armor class of 10 and cut it.
Yeah,
I
Temple
saw.
and Alexander.
I did see that comment. But I was flying through the comments at that point. Just say hello to a few more people who've joined us. Just say hello to Lionel Hutz. I don't think I've seen you in a live stream before. I know you've commented on a few videos. Mar Hopman's here. K5K is here. Alex.
Yes. K5.
DM James has arrived as well. Hello, DM James. So just Larissa Zimba's here as well. I remember seeing you a few weeks ago. So great to see everybody. Well, you were going to say something anyway, DK.
No, I was just about to say about the comment you have shown up right here. As an experienced DM, what is the one character skill or ability from the character sheet that you hate but have no choice but to keep? Perception.
You beat me
Perception or insight. Oh my God. I hate those two skills with a fucking passion. I hate them so much. Like, and the reason I hate it so much is because I was that player who said, walk into a room, make a perception check. What does the person feel like? Make an insight check. It's so annoying. It got to the point where other people at the table, every time we entered a room, would look at me, expecting me to make a perception check. I don't do this anymore because I learned my lesson.
I think both of those do cheapen the adventure a little, but I think Elf Beta got a different opinion here.
Perception and insight are important, I think, in games because if used right, they can be like anything. They can be abused because there's no way.
There's the key. DM,
yeah, but there's no. But as far as getting rid of them, I don't think there's any way that a DM can impart as much information as a person's senses actually take in about an environment or a person in a timely fashion at the table. Unless you want me to roll out a semi-legalese document or, some, brilliantly written piece of literature that describes the room, you're going to have holes. And at that point, that's where those skills fall in. Now, like if it's like what DK is talking about, where you walk in and like, I'm going to do a perception check. Well, what are you trying to perceive? Is what I'll usually fire back. How are you doing it? Why? Or I'll even counter them like, you guys are going to the bar to get a drink. Why are you caring? Your character is not doing that.
Hey. Down here in the South. No, I'm just kidding.
I think both of those skills are very much characterize the whole idea of playing the character sheet rather than the game itself.
Yeah, I think it's more so. I don't. It's not that because I even I use them in Lion and Dragon. I do use them, but it's just I hate the philosophy of, because it's the same with like in the 5e game I'm playing in, where players, when they fight trauma, wink wink, they'll declare themselves making a sanity save. And I'm like, if you are going to make a sanity save in a Gothic horror game, you are trivializing the sanity save, because you would not be making them if it wasn't a joke. If making a sanity check was very detrimental, which it should be, you would be doing everything in your power as a player to avoid them like the plague. But you don't do that.
That just
and
reminds
don't
me
forget,
of some of the poorly
it should
Cthulhu
always
adventures.
be the DM. Don't forget, it should always be the DM who calls the players to roll the dice and not vice versa.
Yes. Oh my God.
Well,
because if you roll and then it's a fail, you have to abide by the result. That's
the other part that comes down to it when we're talking about perception and insight, and it's not that I'm against those things. I much prefer them, or how do I want to put this, is that it's more passive instead of active. Now, if you're trying to say you're reading someone, and this is one thing I like about Werewolf and Vampire in the World of Darkness, where they would give, what those stats would do. like this would be, like me, like, oh, you've had 6 weeks of, fencing training. They would give some, but they did the same thing for perception things. And then I said, okay, instead of me rolling, what would you pick out from that? It's not that I want to say everything. And in certain cases where you haven't described things, if you're searching a word.
Omen, I don't know if it's just me, but you sound very like. I
don't know.
You sound very. A little bit like it. Like some words come in clear, kind of, but others sound like you're boring. Like I can barely hear you. It's weird. Is it just me?
I can hear him clearly, but he's a little more distant than usual.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, you're a little distant. I think that's
okay.
What the problem
Well,
is
I'm about the same distance I always am. I think part of it is, and I noticed it myself, is maybe my sinuses.
Maybe.
Possibly.
Okay.
But it feels that way. Anyway, the other part, probably not yelling as loud either, but the other part is that if they're rolling and you're rolling a perception, that could say that I'm going to tell you clues you would not normally have picked up, or that you would have missed if you don't specify things particular. And I think that's part of the whole thing in there, is to go for the whole aspect of, I would rather not roll as much and just simply say, you know what, with your perception, you would know where to look, or you're more likely to find certain, if they had secret doors. Oh, okay. Those are times that you would go through that and say, well, I'd rather be more passive than active. And the same thing with insight is you have to talk to that character long enough. It's just like anyone that's ever watched the behavior panel. I don't know if you guys have watched that, as they watch the body language of everybody. Probably 30 minutes.
Your battery's in here, so if you
narrowing down where
can you get it, and I'll do it for you.
The tooth, or if they're upset, or things like that. So yes, there's that thing. Yes, Dave, I have to laugh because actually my grandfather's name was Leonidas, and he came from the Greek. But yeah, actually we're the Spartans. But yeah, those are. But that's the thing that I would look at, is don't allow them to just skip over stuff. And it's the same thing like whenever we're talking about gaps and puzzles, is if you have languages, at a certain point, if they find a note and they're not sure, is the best thing to do is to translate and scratch out words, or put in the wrong word if they and that's hard as a DM, but you have to have that there. You might actually make that roll for them hidden beforehand, and then give it to them and go, oh, that's wrong, later on. Anyone that's ever tried learning a language realizes to mess up words or meaning. And that would be an easy way of doing it, whenever you're starting to roll to give them ideas.
I like the language thing. I use that with common a lot in my games, because in my games, common is usually sort of a pigeon trade language sort of a thing. And so like if they're trying to convey, complex ideas or ascertain complex ideas, and they're speaking in common, there's a good chance that it's just not going to come through because,
That's a good point. I never thought of doing that.
One thing, I mean, who was it? Was it you, Omanal, who mentioned Pharaoh in the chat earlier? The module Pharaoh.
Oh, I love Pharaoh. Well, someone mentioned Pharaoh before me, and I love Pharaoh. And the other one I recommend for anyone that looks at OSE is go read The Plangent Mage if you're going to be the DM. It's got some cool musical puzzles and a few other things in there that I just thought were really cool, which is part of the reason I love it. And it's not that they're necessarily hard, but you have to try things. Pull this lever, pull that lever, and see where things maneuver. And
what I was going to say is on the whole language thing is when in the module Pharaoh, it's got something like the characters have a 20 or 25% chance of understanding any inscription that's written into the adventure. I threw that out completely, and I transcribed those messages, put them up in Word, and then used found a hieroglyphic type font and changed the messages into a hieroglyphic type font, and then handed the messages out to my group as they found them. So as they were finding more and more of these messages, they were able to assign letters in the right places and slowly decipher them as the adventure went on. And one of my players really, really got into that, and he was hoarding them. And I think we were there for like a 5-6 hour session, and he only broke out of. It's only when there was a combat that he turned his head away from trying to solve this puzzle. But I loved that because he was so invested in it. And at the end of it, for him to be so happy that he had cracked all the letters and he was able to read out at the end of the session what all these inscriptions were to the rest of the group, he'd got that sense of achievement that he'd solved it. And I loved that as a DM because I'd engaged him and given him a side of the game that he really enjoyed.
You know, the other part is if you have a recurring thing. This is the thing we forget about 1E, and I've been slowly starting to piece things out, because I just went over like the, it says dungeon levels. If you actually look at it, they would go in the same dungeon multiple times.
Yeah.
So it wasn't the same problem that we would have nowadays where, oh, you went to the dungeon, you're done. They might go down to level 1 and then that party would get wiped out, or they'd retreat, and then they come back and, and they would keep going down and down. Then that's where you also have like, well, we know there's a good magic item in there, but we have to get it before this other party comes in tomorrow and grabs it. And of course but that allowed you as a DM to put up inscriptions or things, and players could slowly decipher them over weeks or months. Yeah. And if different groups got together, they might solve it faster. And like, oh, hey, look, there's a secret door over here that takes us to the 4th level instead of trying to walk down the stairs through all the different monsters.
Right. Let's have a look back on some more. Any questions in the comments? Because a lot of the comments are chatter based on what we're saying. So if there's any questions people have got, that would be interesting. Right.
Wow, I meant to get you an email.
I'm going to bring up.
Graham, we can hear your missus.
Yeah.
I'm going to bring up one other thing, and this is the problem with 5e right now, is that they have decided to put the player section with the DM section. And I hate saying this, as just the way that I am. If you put it in the same book, even if I'm only the player, I'm going to flip over and look at it. And that ruins the fun for yourself. And
they need to redo the DMG, because the current DMG in 5th edition is a really good Dungeon Master's Guide. I mean, it's got a lot of really useful tools, but I think they also, especially this day and age, need to go back and have a nice section on how to actually run the game, or default, kind of a basic how-to, and separate it out.
Yeah.
Well, a DMG2 that would have a lot of puzzles and traps and everything else. And for the players that don't want to ever run GMs or anything, they don't have to get it. But like I said, this is an excellent book right now. For right there, I really enjoyed it. It just reading it is fun to read, and that's the other part too. People forget about this as a DM. Sometimes we just read things for the sheer enjoyment. And
yes.
See, Omanal and Elfbay, here's the problem. Like, you say they want more stuff on how to run the game or how to make more traps and stuff. That's not, from my experience and what I've seen and what I've played in, that's not what players want to do. They don't dungeon delve. They hand wave exploration. They're more focused on.
I didn't say anything about how to run dungeons, but I said about how to run the game.
Oh,
how to be a
I mean, like, see, that's the kind of thing that would be needed to run the game. Most 5e players aren't interested in that style of play. They'll just do whatever they want anyway, because the kind of stuff that you'd want to put into the Dungeon Master's Guide for running the game, they'll just disregard it anyway.
Well, as a pretty big consumer of 5e, like YouTube videos and stuff like that, I would say that there's a pretty high demand for how to run stuff. There is a lot, and a lot. My brother, if I ever need a book for the art of running games, he's got a library on it, and so there's enough being written to where enough people are generating that kind of interest.
Well,
maybe I don't know. Maybe I'm just a bit cynical at this point. Maybe I'm just. My biases is kind of blinding me, but I don't know.
Well, the problem that I have all too often is that you get the dick, which is the only way to describe it. You get the dick player who intentionally is throwing the entire game off. Now, we can all complain about railroad, but at a certain point, if the DM puts it down there that we're going to go rescue the princess, and the players have agreed to go rescue the princess as one of the plots, there's something going on there, and they find this, you know what, she's a hassle. Why not? I'll just kill her off, and then I don't have to mess with the dragon or whatever to bring her out. You're like, hey, and I've seen players that do that. The players that find it fun to where they're trying to outthink the DM rather than, and this is the point of why I like the puzzles. You're not really outthinking me. I already know the answer, but I'm trying to get to challenge you so you enjoy outsmarting the puzzle itself. And the other part is I know Shadow had mentioned this or Legion of Myth at one point. The problem that you had too often is the DMs were like, haha, you didn't know what you were doing. And a lot of times if I expect players to solve something, if they are not solving it, that's a failure on my part.
Yeah.
I don't feel like they're dumb. As I went, well, maybe I made this thing too hard. Well, again, if I'm starting to use different numbers and things that are math that are easy to me, you know that a lot of newer players, I don't want to knock it, are English majors where they may get the riddles, which I have problems trying to write myself with the rhyming and everything else. But they aren't to get the math stuff. Well, okay, that's a failure for me as a DM to tailor my riddles and puzzles to my players. And I understand what we're talking about there. And I also, you know, for Kobold, I need simple traps, but I still want them to make it in there. But we all love, if anyone remembers the Indiana Jones and, you know, the Last Crusade, where he has to go over, he says, the pious man has to bow. He's like, well, what does that imply? Or the leap of faith, or, you know, pick the proper goblet. You know, those are the things that come into D&D as well. And I think that's I think that's the part that we're missing sometimes for this is those are the kind of players that they want to come back and go into that dungeon. Ooh, we'll find my friend did one with the even when he was fighting a monster, they had to destroy certain things to kill the monster off. And they still loved it. But it was more than just how much damage can I do per round. It was much more, and once you learn that the weakness, you know, what is the weakness for this, and you do this, that Dungeon Fall Classics has some of that in there as well.
Favorite books to use in a game, in-game books, mine would be things like charts and maps, because they're very flexible and players can choose to go down that particular story hook. Whereas if it's like a textbook, a magic users textbook, the players might be tempted to say, I'll just look in the book and see what it, you know, hunting for information. A map would give them options as to whether they want to go down that particular storyline or not.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, onto Mark Hawkman's question, yeah. My favourite use for books in a game, I like the way Call of Cthulhu, I mean, in terms of mechanics, again, I'm going back to Call of Cthulhu, I like the way Call of Cthulhu deals with books, in that you can you have the option of skim reading them or studying them. This is mostly specifically Cthulhu Mythos books, but I like the way the books have work with the mechanics of the game, in that there is a risk and reward. There's a benefit and almost always a drawback from using them. I'm not sure if that's what Mark Hotman was getting at there, but
we had a discussion in the chat about books. So
my favorite use for books is dispensing history, actually.
Yeah.
You know, like
world knowledge.
Yeah, basically, yeah. But not like to the point of exposition. I would just be like, oh, you see so and so this kingdom on this year, blah blah. But then I would just skip ahead, like, and this pertinent piece of information is here. But usually it'd be like for like in my like Lion and Dragon game, since most people aren't assumed to be literate, and it might be in a language that they don't speak from a time zone that's far before their time. So
they could use downtime to study it and potentially learn.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, of course. Yeah. They could either get like a high-level magister or someone who can read, or an academic. They could do that.
In my campaign, I actually started assigning value to books like treasure, treating them like the valuable items they would have been in that kind of time frame. And my players started grabbing them, especially when they'd ask me, well, is there anything interesting on the bookshelf? And I'd be like, well, it's the usual, essays on arcane spells, but there seem to be a couple of, like, there's volume 1 and 2 of, monsters of the northern wilderness, and then they're like, oh, we're grabbing those, and then they would engage with it because in their downtime they're going to start reading them. So when they're in the northern wilderness sometime and one of the players remembers that, they're like, hey, back when I read that book, was there anything in there that I would have picked up about these footprints, or do I recognize these footprints? Or they're sometimes, if it's some sort of field manual travel guide or something like that, they'll have it on their person, and like, I pull it out and I'm going to look at the chart in the back of the pullout with all the footprints.
I mean, there was, if you look at a lot of the British written modules for AD&D, Sinister Secret of Saltmarsh and the UK series, quite a lot of the treasure in those is in the form of books, which can easily be sold. But it depends on if the players want their characters to keep them and study them. And if I was playing them as part of a campaign, I would certainly let that player know that their character has learned something about whatever the topic is in the book.
Yeah,
and
it's no coincidence that campaign was the one where my players hired interns. So.
Yeah.
Well, Call of Cthulhu is a perfect one for the books.
Oh,
Are you going to read that? And it really encourages that. But the other part I also like is if you're, like you're saying, learning some things. Again, I wish that they would do a better job and not put necessarily everything in there. But like, I'm just going to mention Iron Kingdoms because they have their DC checks. When you go through, if you're low, there can be misinformation in there. As you get higher, it gets more and more exact.
That's good.
And I think that's one of those things that would be kind of cool of, oh, because you have this book, it will add +1 or +2 to your knowledge check or whatever it's going to be in there if you have studied it and say, okay, and that to me is something that's really missing in D&D currently, is the idea that you can find books so you can understand up to the point that I can then start telling you, green slime does this, but it's vulnerable to this, or this is a gibbering mouth, and the more common it is, I think that's it. That would really help. Or what is the weakness of a certain dragon? What is that's the thing that I want to say, the old fantasy horror tropes. You find the book and how to summon the demon. And D&D doesn't do this so much, but they have their scrolls, or they have their book of, this is the manual that'll make you stronger, which nowadays be called an exercise program. But I think I think that would have been really cool to have. Is there are certain things I just wish that they would do as far as arcane checks. The more that I get into D&D, the more I just wish that they had left a lot of the skills out and had put special skills for the players in there. Like the mage will begin to understand on how different monsters in arcane go. So that's, they make them a scholar on top of casting spells. The priests would understand undead, demons, otherworldly beings from that aspect. And you can get a little bit of overlap between the mage and the cleric. And then the same thing with and then your thief would understand the integration of how people interact and things like that. I just wish that they did more of that aspect instead of just trying to throw skill after skill, and you never get enough skills to feel like a fully rounded character.
Yeah.
But you get enough skills to, it's like, well, I only have 4 skills. You're just going, yeah. It seems more limiting because of that. Whereas Call of Cthulhu has so many skills, you're like, okay. So anyway,
I have a problem in my current D&D game where one of my players is playing a sorcerer, and he keeps wanting to lean on his Arcana skill, and I'm like, you're lucky I even let you have that Arcana skill. I'm like, you don't have any formal training in magic. You just woke up one day and pooped out a fireball. But
anyway, I'm just going to draw attention to the fact that we have a super chat from DM James.
Wow.
Thank you, James. Marvelous, wonderful.
Round of applause.
And we're talking about magic items, and James likes garments that, when worn, keep themselves and their wearer clean and fresh smelling. Something we do forget about in games is that his characters can be very, very smelly on the road, and certainly this would be very pleasant. And this sort of thing should help. Certainly when characters are trying to be stealthy or when carousing in town.
Yeah, because I don't think the king wants a bunch of ragtag adventurers who just came out of the sewer traking muck and sewage all over his nice clean carpets. And I certainly don't think players want to catch diphtheria from having fought the Otyugh. That doesn't sound too fun.
You want to see your players react where they have them walk into some lord's house or whatever and immediately get assaulted by the help. Rushing them off to take a bath. They're like, "We came to see the king." No, out with you, out with you, out with you.
For God's sake, I remember in Aaron's OSC game, I was playing a thief and we were sneaking in to a kobold's keep, like what we call the meat grinder. Oh my God, the amount of players we lost. Oh, it was horrible. Like fantasy Vietnam. But they were going in through the sewer grate and they were like, I was horrified. They were just like getting up like kobold shit and smearing it for camouflage. Like, what is wrong with you? Just use the mud. Why are you doing this? It's horrible.
He's just saying the sewer. I don't know if you can tell the difference.
I will say that in our Monday night game, I'm playing the part of a satyr, and I'm currently trying to play up his bestial nature. And we went to fight what we knew would be a group of basilisks. We didn't know how many there would be.
Basilisks.
And my character's been sleeping in the stables of the inn. And so beforehand, I said, "Okay, have any horses been sleeping in this stable?" And the DM was, "Oh yeah." And so I used horse manure to paint my body, and then offered to perform that same ritual of protection for all the other characters because horse manure would protect them.
That's actually funny that you brought up Basilisk, that you threw a group of Basilisks, because in my last line in Dragon game, and there were satyrs in the town that they took, and there was a Basilisk in there as well. It was so funny because no matter what they did, the Basilisk would never wake up. They volleyed like 7 or 8 times, fought Strixes and like 20 skeletons, and the thing just would not pass its perception check. It never woke up, and they fucking slaughtered it.
Well,
lucky for them.
The other part of talking about this is, and I've listened to some people talk about going in Vietnam, and they could smell the Viet Cong without ever seeing them, just because you eat strong food and stuff. People forget that human beings are pretty smelly if we haven't bathed in a while, much more than a lot of other animals. But
I think the flip side
some
of that
nerdy shops we'd know that.
I remember, I think, reading in like the Pacific, the flip side was true with like the Japanese and the Americans. They could, because we reek because of our dairy.
It's grease. Where you sweat out, like depending on what you eat, your sweat and bodily fluids like smell different. And if you like have a lot of grease in your diet, you're gonna stink to high heaven.
Yeah, I went to college at a college that had a lot. It was a primary place for Japanese exchange students. And one of the things they always complained about is that Americans they smelled rancid because we just drink milk with everything and butter and cheese.
well,
you eat processed milk and cheese and butter. Over here, our butter and cheese and milk has actual butter, cheese, and milk in it.
You're wrong. We have real stuff here, but especially I'm sitting here in the Midwest right now, so I'm in cheese.
Oh, okay, fine. That's fair.
No. I grew up on a farm, so I don't want to hear
it. Fake news.
Well, and but people forget, like, certain animals are really strong smelling, especially when the males. Beaver, boy, you can smell them from all over.
A goat.
Goats are horrible.
Never milk your goats when there's a male goat in rut around.
Yes.
I know.
Because then your entire refrigerator smells like old goat if you put that thing in there.
Going back about 30 years, I used to know somebody who kept a couple of ferrets, and yes,
I'll be back in a little bit, guys. I got to step away.
I'll say, man. Yeah, I used to help my when I was really young, help my friends, like uncles and aunts on the farm. We would there's like these cattle that they'd have like in these pens with these grates for their shit to go down. We had to like push the shit down. Oh God, did it fucking stink to high heaven? It was.
I'm gonna change tack now. Having had that, I love the topic there.
What?
Lionel, Lionel Hutz has asked the question: what is a skill or ability that you've imported or stolen from one rule set and imported or hacked into another? For example, a Call of Cthulhu skill into a D&D character. Have any of you ever done this?
Well, I've seen it done, like I said, with Sanity. Hmm.
I mean, I've stolen the mechanics, but honestly, for skills, I tend to use what's on the sheet, and then just modify it from there. Because otherwise, we got a saying, you're slicing the bologna pretty thin. At a certain point, I would rather leave the skills much more broad than really narrow it down. A perfect example is, when I was watching Legion of Myth do his stuff on Palladium, and the skills kept getting more narrow and more narrow. And more, I'm like, stop. What you really want to do is say, if you have a certain skill level, you can do this, which is why I like the World of Darkness. They had some other skills, like secondary skills, but the same thing that I always get mad about is they'll have this one big, broad skill, and then they have all these, like, oh, you have pistol and rifle. Like, a lot of things are very similar and trade over. It's the same thing that I feel about melee. Why in the world is unarmed combat and melee combat? Anyone that's doing actual melee combat has to learn unarmed combat. It's a simple fact, because you're going to get close enough and you're going to hit with your fist. That's what's going to happen, and people forget about that. But they act like they're two completely different skills.
Yeah, I will assume skill combinations in Call of Cthulhu, like you say there. You're supposed to have separate brawl skills and separate sword and whatever different types of weapons. And if someone's got a good brawl skill, I'll let them fight with a lot of simple weapons with that bonus. But I've only in recent years started playing skill-based games such as Call of Cthulhu. I'm still fairly new to Call of Cthulhu. I think it's about 5 or 6 years I've been playing it. And I generally keep the systems separate, but I do tinker within a system rather than import from other games. I haven't quite got to that level yet. I guess if I played another 10 years of Call of Cthulhu, I might start thinking of bringing other things in. But I'm enjoying, for example, Call of Cthulhu as it is, and I enjoy AD&D as it is. But there again, I've said before, my version of AD&D is a combination. I use bits and pieces from basic D&D and a simplify initiative and things like that.
D&D and stuff like
to basic D&D levels. But that's not skills anyway. I mean, I suppose if you're even running skill checks when running first edition, you're bringing in rules that were only really codified around BX, BECME, and second edition, because there were no skill checks in the original AD&D rules. First edition.
Not until you start getting into the Dungeoneer survival guide,
no, quite.
And they were optional. And they were optional rules anyway, and they were usually roll under your skill or your stat, and that was it. Like, I'm not a huge fan of skill-based systems anyway. I don't like them. I think to me, it's just too anal. It's because like I prefer the skill. If I do include skills, that like the thief has the skills, and I like FMAG's approach to the skills. It just says thievery, and it's like and it just says at the DM's discretion, anything that the DM feels falls under the purview of the thief. Like, and obviously most skilled DMs will say picking locks, climbing, moving silently in darkness, stealth, and you can just say, well, they have a 2 and 6 to 5 and 6 chance depending on their level. Boom, that's it. And you roll your d6, and if you roll 5 or lower, or whatever your percentage is, you succeed. Done.
I love skill-based games myself. Skill-based games, because, well, one is that players can always feel like they're advancing, even if they're not necessarily getting better in combat. Whereas level-based combats are very different. There is a huge power jump between first and second level, and second and third, especially in 5th edition. All of a sudden you've got triple the hit points. You're getting better hit. You now got a subclass. For 3rd edition, there's a huge jump in there. But if it's a skill-based game, okay, fine. I don't have enough experience, or I want to get this little skill. And you start getting. Now that said, I think the other point of whenever you bring in skill-based is if you're putting in a skill, it needs to be used. It needs to be important. The problem all too often is that they want to do it for flavor, when it really doesn't matter mechanically. If it doesn't matter mechanically, just don't put it on the character sheet. I think that's one of those that's in there is right. Like parachuting. Well, parachuting's great. It's not a skill I need for my for 5e. There's no reason to have that skill in 5e. There are no, and that's that's the other part that comes into it is different games have different aspects. Is piloting matters? Not necessarily, but if you're on a, it's like riding a horse. In modern day, your ability to ride a horse is almost zero, except if you want to go on a date. Or you're trying to wrangle up cattle. But it was really common, 100 years ago. So by not putting that skill in the game, you're not having players waste points, but you're also not going to be using that in the game generally.
And James says here, most things handle with an attribute check, and that is the quick way of doing it. And that's the way of you can have skills represented in a very general way, but a logical way, and that's just the you can use what's already there on the character sheet.
I do appreciate an RPG that bothers to have a small section talking about every man's skills. There's a few of them, like Cyberpunk, I think, had that. They had like every man's skills, like everybody can do this, that, and the other. Off the top of my head, I can't remember too many of them, but there are definitely
like cooking.
Ones around. Well, I mean, basic stuff like, yes, you cannot starve and die. Can you prepare food at a Michelin-rated restaurant? No. That's where the cooking skill comes in.
Yeah.
And that's sometimes you get the overuse of skills, don't you? I
think that's what Call of Cthulhu is good for. Like, again, always seems to come back to, they have all those skills on the sheet that they're like 5%, because this is just the everyman skills,
Yeah.
I don't know. Plus, I don't like Call of Cthulhu too much anyway. Not just because it's skill based, but also it uses filthy non-platonic solids. It uses the filthy D100. How dare it?
I think when you get a lot of skill-based systems, people start thinking, because I don't have that skill, I can't do it. And you have to assume, like you're saying, there's a base chance. If the evening is dry and you're in a forest, then your adventurers who've lived out in who've got basic living experience will be able to build a fire. The only time you need to roll a check on a specific fire building skill is when it's wet, when the only foliage around are leafy bushes rather than the odd few dead trees, or it's a howling gale and you can't get things to sit in one place.
In my game between the ranger and the innkeeper's daughter, nobody's going hungry and having trouble starting a fire.
Yeah, exactly.
Or if you've got to do something as well, if you've got to do something in a hurry, that's when you make a check.
Yeah,
but
when there's stakes.
Yeah, and I was even talking to this with one of my former players, and it was like, look, at the end of the day, if say someone in their background will say, if I have that system in my game, and they know how to drive, I'm gonna be like, it's gonna get to the stage where you're at such a high level of experience, like I am not even gonna bother having you roll the thing. This is heroic fantasy. The heroes, like Indiana Jones, may take a few seconds to start the engine when the Nazis are after him, but he never not turns on the engine and it gets away. I'm sorry, this is heroic fantasy. You're not, I don't care. If you're 12th level, you've done this enough, you're going to start the engine and drive away.
Yes.
I don't care.
I mean,
I'm not even going to bother.
Pulp games before. I mean, I've even run entire combat sequences in pulp games where I'm like, don't bother rolling dice to hit. If you say I pop out the window and, plug one of the Nazis with a pistol, I'm like, okay.
Roll damage. Like
exactly,
yeah,
it's just it's not important because it's pulp, so there's always more Nazis. That's when if I feel like I've let them kill too many and it's getting too easy, that's when they go by the crossroads and then the two motorcycles pull out behind them instead of the big truck full of Nazis.
Yeah, like that. At that point, they might make rolls to hit you, and then you take damage. But you'd be more like rolling dexterity checks to avoid the blockades that they're going to start erecting to stop you.
Exactly.
That's what you have to be worrying.
Focus the die rolls on the stunts the players want to do rather than the minutia of combat.
Oh yeah.
The other part is I talk about DM James attribute. This is the one thing I do like for the optional rule for
AD&D
for 5e.
Oh,
5e has the optional rule in there, and everyone ignores it. I think it's actually a really good one, which is your attribute. Instead of having skills, you roll out, and the GM determines if it's under your attribute or not, which really encourages players to get a feat for, oh, well, I have this for my primary attribute. Let me get this skill for my other attribute. And I think that that's one of the things that would be nice for that whenever you're talking about rolling for your saves and things. But I also like, the older I'm getting, the more for 5e, or looking at, again, this is hacking it, just get rid of the skills and say, what is your character's profession? If you can give me a good reason that you would have this skill, you roll with the proficiency bonus. If you don't, oh well, you don't. I'm not going to try to keep track of every skill you have. You say you're a pirate, and you say you know swimming, you know sailing, you know how to tie knots. I'll give that to you. If you're going over to other things, then we might have to talk. But but I think that would be easier to deal with. But if you're saying I know how to ride a horse, I'm like, no, you don't. You're a pirate. Pirates don't ride horses on ships.
But you decide.
Like, I mean, like, one of the new players in my my formerly DCC game is wanted to play a duck mutant, and I said, okay, so your mutant powers are you can speak to ducks, you can hold your breath underwater for an hour, and you never have to make a swim check. Well, as long as you're wearing like leather armor on calm waters, you'll never have to make the check. Now, if it's rapids or you're wearing heavier armor, then you're going to have to make checks. Then you will. But outside of that, you're a duck, you can swim, it's fine. I'm not even going to bother. Anyone else, though, then you'd have to start making rolls.
You've got skills that lead on from other skills as well. Like, for example, most thieves will be quite good at moving goods around the place, or logistics, which may
appraising goods. Yep.
Yeah, come in handy later when you're trying to build a stronghold. Logistics would be something that was really useful.
Yep.
Well, I want to get us onto one of the notes I've made on my sheet here, in that I'm going to make a statement here. I want to see what you think about it. I think that in a game where the emphasis is on player skill, that the players will pay more attention to the game environment and the NPCs, and will listen to what the DM has to say a lot more. And that extra engagement in the game is something I want to foster.
Yes, absolutely.
But then why even have? But then the question also comes to, I'm not disagreeing. The question is, then why include any mental statistics? You're left with GURPS, which is just purely physical.
You see, here's the thing. Because in my games, I don't, unless it's a comedy game, low intelligence in my games from now on denotes not your whether a character's dullard or not, it's whether or not they're an academic. Like, a 3 intelligence barbarian is not a drooling, barely verbal moron. They're just really dumb at academics. And if you play your character like that kind of idiot and intentionally doing things that get the party in jeopardy, I'm sorry, but you're kind of being an asshole. You're just not going to be the ones to like read the ancient lore dumps or the old books. You're just not going to be interested. But you're not a drooling idiot.
But again, then why even include the mental statistics in that case? I mean, that's the
mental statistics. Certainly, looking back to AD&D, they have an impact on the character's ability as an adventurer. Certainly, your ability to learn languages, your ability of how many spells a mage can have, how good a mage is at learning new spells, how good characters are resisting certain types of spells, how many bonus spells a cleric gets. So that's baked into the character's power.
I'm really surprised that 5th edition did away with that for intelligence.
I mean, and here's the thing: if you even look at the original way stats were shown on character sheets, it wasn't strength, dex, con, intelligence, wisdom, charisma. In the very early stages of the game, it was strength, intelligence, wisdom, dexterity, constitution, and charisma. And if you look at which classes came out of the game, you start to notice the stats are forming in order. It was the fighting man, then the magic user, then the cleric, and then the thief, then constitution and charisma. Constitution and charisma are things everyone uses for health and for followers. But the thief was last, then the cleric, then the wizard, then the fighter. So they're forming this in. So that's why the stats were there. They're just to inform. These are classes and archetypes. So these are the stats for those archetypes. If you have high intelligence, you generally play a wizard. If you have high wisdom, you generally play a cleric. You don't always have to, but since this is kind of an adventure game where you're a team player, you have a niche to fill. If you have these stats, you generally should play these things for the benefit of the group, not just for yourself. That's why I say the stats are there. It's just to fill in archetypes.
No,
That's it.
I personally like having the mental aspect stats.
Oh, yeah.
But the point is that if you're not really going to use them, then they shouldn't be included. Is my point. And that's why the character was purely physical.
Right. But again, in the old schools is that they would just use them for like XP bonuses and stuff like that. And then the more post hoc rationalizations of extra spells or bonuses to skills, that comes much later. But I'm looking at it from like the very, like we'll say D&D. Like what was the original intent behind it? And I think it was just, well, it's just to reinforce the niche that, well, you're the smart guy, so therefore you're the wizard, or you're the wise one, therefore you have a high spiritual nature, therefore you're the cleric. And I think they just put that in there as the game was being fleshed out, and it was just a hang up, and that's all, so
well, a character could potentially try and do anything. In fact, that is the idea. It's the game of the imagination, and the rules, okay, they try and quantify, but it's only a fraction of that, of all the various possibilities. So character says, I'd like to try and do this. Does it fit neatly into one of the skills or the attributes? Well, if not, then some degree of improvisation might be needed. But whatever rules you agree on, the idea is that a character could do try and do absolutely anything.
Yeah, I just like to point out though that the Michael Stronghold points out, I love how intelligence is the dumb stat in 5e. Ha ha ha, poetic a little. And I'm like, also, yeah.
We said so.
Yeah.
Back in the day, it was so poetic a little.
But here's the funny thing with charisma. If you actually read the DMG, it is one of the most powerful things if you start playing with followers and everything else. And
yes. Except for Rangers.
Well, it doesn't know all of them. If you actually start reading things,
encounter reactions.
It was really overpowered if you were playing with all those rules. And my favorite for that is that if you start reading the DMG, it'll go groups of 25. The only reason you put in groups of 25 is because you had groups of 25 in the rule sets. And go look at like how easy it is to maneuver and hide things and going.
Right.
The expectation is that for every PC, you probably had 2 to 3 retainers that went in there, which always reminds me of the Army of Darkness where he screams "Sword Boy," and instead of pulling his sword out, he kicks the boy off the side, and that's how his sword becomes unsheathed.
The only reason I said, go ahead.
No,
go ahead.
I'm give a bit of a shout out to Mage's Musings here. One of the reasons I like watching his game recaps on his channel is that in those game recaps, his party is using retainers. The DM is rolling a lot of reaction rolls, and the charisma of the player characters has had a major impact on success and failure in a lot of situations, and that to me really shows how the game was intended to be run, and the importance of charisma and retainers. So I mean, check his channel out. Those game recaps, they're good fun. They are good fun. But I want to stress what Gene from Inksplat Records says here. AD&D was all over the place. So different rules were made up for random spells and monsters and situations. And he's gone later to say that was the reason for 3rd edition to codify that randomness. What I found though with the fact that there were different rules and lots of different subsystems in AD&D, the game didn't break if you ignored little bits and pieces. And it was so easy to tinker with one section without it affecting anything else because everything was independent. Now, I know the game developed over time and thus things were bolted on, but one of the best parts about AD&D is you can take or leave so many of these little rules for random spells and monsters and situations, and the game wouldn't fall apart. The game would still be cohesive as long as the DM was consistent in what they did, and the approach was telegraphed to the players. All was good. All was good.
I also think that subconsciously that may have had something to do with the fun of the game. When you sit down in AD&D back then and you're looking at your character sheet and you're saying, oh, for this I'm rolling a d6 and here I'm rolling 100s and this one got to roll over and this one I got to roll under and I got this weird, I mean, it kind of kept you on your toes. Talk about interest in the, keeping interest at the table, but also I feel like early on, if you had sat down with people and figured out all of this weird nonsense, that there was a certain sense of accomplishment, or you were in this secret society who only you and 5 other of your buddies understood this crap, and and it was just like it kept your brain awake at the table because you're jumping around from mechanic to mechanic. A unified mechanic like 5th edition has is great. If you think about it, it's nice because it's easy to teach the game, it's easy to keep the game, but it does make it very samey, very blah. And even that has created problems with that whole argument over, critical success on skill rolls. Why don't I get to critical on skill checks when I can critical in combat? Because they do different things. There's no way you're going to leap to the moon or get the king to give you his army.
I mean, officially, from what I remember, I don't even think 5e kit you baseline rules critical on attacks either. Anyway,
you do.
Like that's a. Oh, I thought there was that was like an optional rule. I didn't know it was like a standard.
A 20 has critical, but their critical hits are not like we think about where you might lose a limb. It's more if you just do double damage.
That's what I mean. Like even then, I just thought it was a guarantee.
You don't even do double damage. You do double dice.
Double dice
sucks. I critted him, and you have a strength plus 1. So you did a total, and you rolled 2 1s on your dice. So you did 3 points of damage on your crit.
That was a common rule when I later on in the games. I just said double the damage. Don't double the dice, just double the damage.
But I'll mention all these subsystems, especially when it comes to monsters and things. The big advantage for that is you didn't know what you were facing when you started, especially if it was something new. And I understand that there are different things, but anyone that's ever played Forbidden Lands, if you look at the monsters, and it's a little bit different, which I kind of like, but you're supposed to roll like a d6 normally, if it makes sense. And every monster has different attacks that do different effects. So when you go up to that monster, until you fought it a few rounds or things like that, you don't know what it's going to do for its attack. Usually as a GM, we're like, oh, it's going to be optimal for this, or it's going to be optimal for that. I'll bring up Alien because there's one where it says it just stares at your character. Your character loses an action. And you're just like, okay. And you go, well, that's not necessarily going to kill you, but now you're just frozen there. And since the alien gets 2 actions to your 1, it can make a big difference. And then it determines where you go from there. And I think there's some of that aspect too of, if the charm spell works differently for a dryad than it does for your magic user or things like that, it allows you're not pigeonholed or you're not confined by the rules where the players feel like, oh, that's wrong, or there's some spells I hate in 5e that says when you cast it, as soon as the spell wears off, they immediately know and cause a negative reaction. Like, so you mean I cast friends or something like that? I'm like, well, who would ever get that spell? It doesn't last long enough. It doesn't do you any benefit, and the guy is immediately pissed off what he's done, rather than saying, well, if he succeeds, depending on how badly he fails, he won't notice or things like that. And I think that's the problem with 5e is while it's become more streamlined, like Flat Record said, but we've lost that flavor and that mystery as a player of what's
it's become more predictable as a result. The streamlining has made things, and those variations kept things fresh. As you say, there were different creatures that would use charms in different ways, and they would aim to charm certain types of player characters, or it wouldn't just be a generic effect. They'd have that extra flavor to their ability.
Yeah, like I even remember. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I've been talking too much. You go ahead, Graham.
I was just wondering if the spell variations would make people players more cautious in combat if they didn't know exactly what spell effects they're getting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Like,
players tend to be much more cautious in combat in older versions of the game because of this unknown, and you have to almost train new players to not charge into combat when you take them back to older games because they're expecting everything to be a little bit predictable.
Yeah, I mean, even things like charm in 5th edition have a lot of the teeth taken out of them because yes, you can still charm people, but
they get a save every round.
Well, not just a save; they know they were charmed.
Really?
And so they've when they're charmed and they come out of it, they realize that you charmed them, and so not only did you get past the guard through the charm and all of that, maybe but now he knows and he's after you. So
the one thing I do like, we'll talk about variable spells. And of course, you only get a few of them. I really like the Conan aspect because you can change. And this is one thing if I wish D&D had done. You can change on what the spell does, and the player, the DM can decide, and then you could add momentum to make it more powerful or less powerful. And I think that it really gives a lot of variation. Now I know the Book of Scalos started saying, well, maybe that's just too free-form. No, that's really cool. I'm going to turn into this animal. All right, but what do you want from that animal? And depending on what you do, makes it harder or easier. And I think that's the whole thing. Yeah, 5e charm lasts a whole hour. Whoopee! I mean, that's exactly where when you look at the Dryad, it was like a year or something.
I mean,
like that.
yeah. In OSC, we charged that we went underground. I remember, and I remember it so vividly because my fighter had like a potion of giant strength, and I just lifted up this boulder blocking because the Durgar had basically detonated dynamite to block us from going in. Then I just went whoop, and we managed to capture one of the Durgar alive, like the dark the gray dwarves, the evil ones from deep underground, and we charmed him. And it lasted 3 weeks. And we kept charming him every single time. And we basically got all the information. We knew how the dungeon worked. We knew where all the monsters were. We knew it was in there. We knew where our dead friends were, so we could retrieve their body for reviving. It was great. I really hate the fact that and the light spell. Oh my God, they killed the light spell. It's so bad. You can't attack with it.
I have seen it argued that some of these spells were a little too powerful in first edition, but it doesn't matter. It gave spellcasters that little kick that they needed at lower levels.
Yeah. I mean, in BX, in AD&D, they actually nerfed light because in BX, I think, because in OD&D it was just a light source, and in BX you could I target the creature's eyes. If you targeted someone's eyes with that thing, they were just out for an hour and a half. They couldn't do anything, and you could just wail on them.
Well, you could do it, but it was -4 to the.
Yeah, it was like -4 to saves, to attacks, and to AC. But in BX, they just couldn't attack. They couldn't move. They were just writhing in pain. They couldn't do anything. But in AD&D, they changed this and said,
So light is a go-to spell at first level, and it evens itself up when the players at later levels are encountering spellcasters of higher levels, because those spells are also really powerful.
It's a trick of old school. Like my clerics, if my clerics at first level have access to spells, they never take Cure Light Wounds. They take light. They never take Cure Light Wounds.
Before we go back to the topic, I just want to Marhawk says here, one trope I love is for bad guys to force the good guys to help them. Yeah, I do. I've mentioned in a few conversations we've had on here about Horror on the Orient Express, and I wish I could restart the game that I had with my local group because they were working for the big bad guy, and he forced them to do it, and they didn't have a lot of choice in the matter because it was that or die.
And we say force, but how many of the TV shows and things are where the bad guy wants one thing and the good guys want another, and they align in that aspect. And it's not necessarily that you have to be forced, but okay, you have the bad guy. He goes look, I want to take over and be the magic user for the king. In the meantime, they're like, but you have to kill this mage because he has the princess entrapped, and I can't do anything. So it's now the players are going to take the fall for it. Yeah, I mean those always make great spells for that. I really do. I want to see that from that, and that's the other part. Is part of the reason I love role playing games that are not on the computer. Is it's not that you can cheese it, but now I can think non-linearly, and the DM can go, you know what, that's a cool idea, go do it. I'm not limited by the game mechanics or whatever especially when it was the 2D scroller. Well, I think it wasn't that, but when you move the little hex, and that's one of the things when I hear one AD&D talk about is how are you going to do that? When I say, okay, I want my character to climb up into the rafters and wait there, and what we'll do is we'll cast a web spell and we'll stick our archer with his back up against the web spell so he can fire from the top.
That's so cool. That's
You'll still
awesome.
be able to do that. You'll still be able to do all of that stuff there. I mean,
but where they're trying to use miniatures and stuff.
Yeah, it's going to play just like using miniatures on the tabletop. All they've created is a virtual tabletop with miniatures and some graphical nonsense. It's not going to be video game-ish.
Well, having this variety of spells and having them not so intensely codified as they are in modern games actually does take us back to the general topic of this whole stream tonight regarding player skill versus character skill, because using these spells in creative environments and, for example, even just getting the right enemy to charm to use these spells like a Duergar, for example, that's all part of player skill. Creative use of spells is all part of player skill. And yes, you are using character skills, but not skills as they are codified now. But spells are, in a sense, a character skill. But it is leaning towards the whole player skill idea, how player creativity is what solves the adventure, what ensures success, rather than just an ability to roll 15 or higher on a d20.
Yeah, it's always nice to see a player using an old spell in a new way.
Definitely.
And you're right, for the codified, the less codified they are within reason, the more I enjoyed it. And I understand when you start looking at 1E versus 5E, now it's concentration. So now you can't layer spells on like you could previously. Like, let me layer 2-3 spells on, and now we can do that.
Was that a big thing in 3rd edition?
I don't know. I didn't. I played 3rd edition like twice, a couple of times. That was about it.
Loads of times on here now. The time when my group used a folding boat and ventriloquism and find familiar in combination to kill Lareth. They met him on the road late. He kicked their asses playing Village of Homlet. So I thought, oh, he's a recurring bad guy. And they met him on the road later on with about 30 of his followers who'd survived. And they got 2 hawk familiars to hover above his tent with a folding boat in its small casket form. And then one of the mages cast ventriloquism to send the command word across the required distance to activate it. And it was dropped on his tent. There we go. Great way. Really, really, really creative way of effectively ending a potentially total party killing fight. As it turned out, I think the whole party took about 5 damage in the whole combat because they just hit them so quickly with such a barrage, and the leader was taken out straight away. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
And I love, as a DM, I love seeing that from my players. Not that I give them the ideas, but they come up with stuff, and I'm just sitting there like, you know what? That's a great idea. It works. You know, too often I think, and this is more the junior DMs. Well, you took out my big bad guy, and they get emotionally invested into those characters instead of saying, "Congratulations, fantastic!
Yes.
Here you go." I love seeing that. If you can do it, and when my jaw just drops, and I just go, "Yeah, that works." That's great. But it has to be unique and original.
I'm glad when my players kill my big bads in like 2 rounds because it means, well, Combat's over. Woohoo!
Just want to say to Grubhill Slan asking DK about the gods in the game. In that DCC game of DK's, it was a monotheistic game. There was just
all my games are monotheistic. Every single one of them are monotheistic.
I know you played in one of your games, and that was monotheistic. It was just God.
God is a big computer and is insane, and if he ever wakes up, the world will blow up. So
we already have a game called that. It's called Paranoia.
No. It's even worse. It's Am from I Have No Mouth But I Must Scream. Imagine if Am was even stronger, controlled a galaxy, and if he ever wakes up, he was driven insane by Cthulhu monsters. That's basically the god that they live in. He's on emergency power at the moment, and if he ever goes full power, the world's going to blow up.
And I'm playing Eric in that game.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are. The edge lord, because he put on the wrong plate armor, and his beloved sex bot known as Dami Mommy.
Yeah,
not by far not the weirdest part of that game. By far, that is not the weirdest thing that we've done in my game. So
I don't think we're going to go into the details of that game on this.
No, we're not. No, we're not. It's family friendly.
You're speaking about that. All I can think is I need to finish up my Kickstarter so I can get the DCC starter kit, so I can get the specialty dice, and then go and order the MCC. The MCC is great. It's $30, which is the same as if you paid for the PDF, and they give you the hardback and all the other stuff. And I'm like, okay, that's like
there's a DCC Kickstarter.
Well, the DCC Kickstarter was the OAR 7, which was the Judges Guild by Janelle. But I forgot. Anyway, with the Dark Tower. I think it's the Dark Tower. Anyway, whatever that one was.
All right.
But you can put in your other stuff, and then they'll ship it for free if you get over $100. It's like, oh, okay. But I have the original book. But I'm like, you know what? You get such a good deal. You get the DM screen, 2 things of dice, and a couple of modules, or I think a module and one other. And the MCC, you get the same thing, but it's $5 cheaper. And I went, well, I want the MCC one too, because both of the cost compatible. So,
right. Anyway, I think we've got to the bottom of chat as well.
But to expand on what I was saying to Slan as well, in my Lion and Dragon game, they basically worship the sun, which is an basically filed off version of Jesus. So there is only one God. Well, okay, there is how the world explains it. There is the God of law, and there are avatars of the God of law. There is the moon, the sun, fire, or the Hebrews who believe in law as a concept, or Jesus, right? And the debate comes in where some representations of law are more lawful than others, and that's where the arguments come in. But everything else that is not lawful, that is worshipped, is either a neutral nature deity, in which case they're very dangerous and not to be trusted, or they're just creatures of chaos. So they're elves, your dwarves, your demons, your frogmen. They're all evil. They may call the things they worship gods, but they're not God. They're demonic, and they are evil, and they are not to be trusted. So
the next point, the last thing on my list here regarding player skill versus character skill, was that for a game in which pushes player skill, the DM is crucial. The DM's attitude is crucial. The DM must be on board, and the DM must. There's three key approaches the DM has to have. The DM must not be beholden to potentially railroady scenarios. The DM must be willing to interpret mechanics and not be rigid about it. And the DM must be able to accept a wide variety of solutions, which is something we mentioned earlier. But in a game where character skill is at the fore, the DM probably just needs to be a referee. And I think leaning on character skill is something that inexperienced or less confident DMs will do more of than pushing the player skill side of it. I know there's times when I've been new to a rule set, I've probably played a game a little bit towards leaning too much towards what the characters can do rather than what the players work with. But once the DM gets really comfortable with the material and the game mechanics, then playing with it becomes more possible, more productive to play with a player skill style of game. That's just my feeling on it, anyway.
I think the other part is if you're relying just purely on character skill, you're denying your players a lot of fun and variety in there. That's the other part is, it's I don't know, but it's great playing war games. We can all do it. We can use the miniatures. We can move them across the board. But even when it came to 40K, it was the little stories that start building around those characters, and then you'd start saying, well, what do they do on the downtime? And it's that role playing on the backside. And I feel that's the same part with the DM is now I get to exercise my mind. It's not just random that I get to pass things. And I think that we're, as DM, if we don't put in these mental challenges and more than just tactical combat, I think that we're really denying our players a whole aspect of fun. No, that doesn't mean, like too many of us dealt with this. Ha ha! How did you not do that? You're going to be the comic book guy from The Simpsons. No, that's not the goal. But those are things. Just like, to be fair, and I know you guys were talking about this earlier about, well, what if I was trying to disarm the bomb? Well, if need be, what I could do is I could say, okay, you have to connect all three without overlapping. And I could give them just a little thing and say, only the player who has that skill is allowed to do this little challenge. And it doesn't have to be that hard. But
no.
if it takes like 30 seconds or a minute, which is a perfect time for any puzzle, then they can feel like, oh, I actually did something. And if they get wrong, then yeah, you can blow them up. I mean, those are, but I think that's one of the important things to look at is you're now giving the player, especially like when we talk about chess and stuff like that, is there's enough things online that I can give a player something that I don't have to create myself and say, here you go, here's a little puzzle for you. And like, oh, okay. And they don't have to do these really weird, intricate puzzles that will take 10 to 15 minutes. I don't think that's necessarily as much fun, but for them just to sit down and go, okay, I'm going to go through here. Well, that doesn't quite work. Let me go here. And you have a little timer. And like, well, I better hook this up. And like, okay, it's done. Good job. You got it right. You move on.
Yeah, that sense of satisfaction of having achieved something. And you're right, it doesn't have to take ages. It can be just something that just takes a couple of minutes. But I said one of my players I mentioned earlier in the game of Pharaoh, he must have spent 5 hours cracking that code. But I knew he was enjoying it. You could tell he was so invested, and he was, I will do this. I will. Oh, brilliant. More clues. Give me all the clues. And he was there working them all out, and then translating them. Oh, I've got that word. Brilliant. I've got that word. And the whole way through, I was enjoying running that session, even with him just sort of sat in the corner solving, because I knew he was having fun. And that's what we're there for, to make the game fun and to try and work out what our players enjoy, but also to try and foster the type of game that we enjoy.
Well, and Pharaoh, one of the reasons I like Pharaoh is there are multiple entrances which required, they had their own little puzzles to get in. Yeah. And not all of them. The other part is, and it's been years since I've pulled that book out, but if I remember correctly, you don't need those hieroglyphs to actually read everything. Not to read everything, but it's not really required for the module. It is a side task that allows them to still go through the main part, but they can do this other side part that gives them, that they can stimulate their mind as well. Especially if you're trying to do some downtime where they're like, okay, we're going to sit in here, and while the other players are talking, this guy is, like you said, is just going through it. And
but it gives them clues as well,
yes.
And the clues will help with their overall success. And yeah. And Squirrel Hermit, yes, you've used all capitals, you've shouted it, Squirrel Hermit, but there you go. I think, to me, that is it. The answer is not on the character sheet.
It's in your
head.
Answer
can sometimes be helped by what is on the character sheet, but the answer itself is not on the character sheet. unless the question is what's your character's name. Yeah. With I wouldn't have Pharaoh in my top 1 or 2, but I think in terms of the classic dungeon crawl, it is right up there. It has flaws. The adventure does have flaws which need to be ironed out, but it's a whole lot of fun. It's worth the effort. I think the best part of the series is the next one in the series, Oasis of the White Palm. I think that is it's a hard module for the DM to get their head around. There's a lot of working parts in it, and it reads terribly, but it plays beautifully. Once you've got your head around.
What is the name of the Pharaoh module called?
Well, Pharaoh is the first one. Oasis of the White Palm is the second one.
Oh, it's just called Pharaoh.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Pharaoh was I3, the first part of the Deserts of Desolation series. Then I4 was Oasis of the White Palm, and I5, Lost Tomb of Martek, was an adventure crammed with wonderful ideas, but its actual their implementation was
a bit
very
dodgy.
shoddy. Yeah, very, very shoddy, unfortunately. It felt unfinished. It felt realized, which was a shame. And the ending was terrible. But I3 and I4 are a great little pair of adventures. Really good.
Just like I like I1 because it had all this stuff, but a lot of them require a lot of work. I think that's the thing that people forget about.
I1 requires a lot of work, and it can be massive. I know when I ran I1, my players were actually getting quite tired of it. If you're into your pulp literature and that sort of stuff, I1 is the ultimate sandbox. My players weren't inspired by all of that, and I learned that fairly quickly. So I kept it shorter. I didn't develop it. I didn't take it any further because they enjoyed the 4 or 5 sessions they played in it, and they enjoyed the little side sessions I did because I had them fall into Hidden Shrine of Tomoa-chan in the middle of I1. Mm-hmm. So that was 3 sessions, and it worked well as like 7 or 8 sessions, I think, the whole 2. But if I'd have taken it a bit further, they would have started looking at their watches and bored. Yeah.
Well, I what I liked about I1 is there are multiple ways into this game.
Yes.
That's what I really liked about I1 for that aspect. And to be fair, they bought a new Yuan-Ti. I mean, there's a lot going on in there if you want to do politics, but you're right. If it's fairly sandboxy, but you got the bullywugs in one area, you start going through it, you start talking to different groups. There's a lot in there that it's more than just what's going on. But I like, from a DM standpoint, I like that. But like you said, you can cut it short. It's time for you. When you guys want to leave, you just walk out and get out of here.
Yeah. I like the Mongolmen bit is my favorite bit in that. I think their little community, I think, is great. There's so much fun to be had with them, and that was the most fun we had, with one of the characters wrestling the Mongolmen leader and beating him, so he's now their leader, and they won't let him leave, and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, great fun. Okay, well, I think we've pretty much done the topic to death. So. And I tend to end about 12 o'clock, so we've got about half an hour just to blether on. And Omanal, I'm not going till 2 o'clock in the morning. I saw what you did to Max on Friday night. Kept it going.
We both did that. I mean, even so, I was trying to cut out early myself. I was like, you know what? I need to do my Duolingo before it ends at midnight. And I screwed up. I was like, oh, I've done that to Connell too. People don't. I used to hate talking until I worked at Dell for where I had to be on the phone for 8 hours a day, doing tech support. And you're just like, okay, there's a reason I went back to college. That will.
But Gingerbeard I don't know if you've seen Gingerbeard's idea in Discord earlier. He's had an idea for a future stream of all of us and chat playing through one of these books.
Oh, you got a nice version.
Fighting Fantasy?
Yeah, I think being the normal paperback, Yeah.
I have heard of Fighting Fantasy. I don't know too much about it. What is Fighting Fantasy?
Choose your own adventure.
I think I know the ones you're on about. Yeah.
And you had a weapon skill, you had health, and you roll a 2d6, and for attacks. Warlock of Firetop Mountain. I like that one because I think you could pick spells in that one too, couldn't you? It's been years. But
That's really big spells.
oh, okay.
Nice.
No, I thought there was one of them where you could pick different spells, and as it went through, it says, "Do you have the spell or not?" And then you could. It had the little branching.
That was Citadel of Chaos.
Oh, okay.
It's got spells.
But the other thing I liked, the other one is, did you ever do the Lone Wolf ones?
We never saw them in this country.
Even though that they're British? I mean, the writer is British, I believe.
Hardly. I mean, the fighting fantasy utterly dominated the choose your own adventure scene. I never saw any of the Lone Wolf ones in a shop ever.
Yeah,
Oh,
I
wow.
think Lone Wolf may be a British author, but I think it was written for the American market.
Well, you know what was funny is I remember Games Workshop had Citadel Miniatures had stuff for Lone Wolf. That's why I was mentioning it. So
Yes, yeah. It's been a long. Dave has mentioned here you pick spells in sorcery. I believe you did. But I had one of the sorcery books when I was about 13. I had no idea what happened to it. And yes, I remember. I do remember the big spells in the sorcery series. They're one of them. I want to get those again. I've been looking on eBay the last couple of days.
But I mean, I was surprised because I thought that it's been translated into Italian and all sorts of stuff. And right now, Home Guard Press has the collector's editions and stuff. But I'm like, I don't want to pay $10 to have them shipped, or $14 or whatever it is for the exchange rate for each book. I mean, that's almost as much as the book itself.
For which books?
If it's the Lone Wolf books, they have they've come out in hardback and everything else. But they actually Cubicle 7. I wish they'd slightly changed the system a bit, but they decided to turn that into a full role-playing game, and then they lost it. But
sorry, when I was 13, I only ever went into Games Workshop in Birmingham, and that
There's a
my route home from school. If I wanted to go to Games Workshop, if I wanted to go home from school normally, I'd walk across the Birmingham University, get on the train at a particular station, and it would take me home. If I was going to Games Workshop, I'd get a bus in the middle of Birmingham, go into Games Workshop for an hour or so, and then catch the train. My route didn't take me past any bookshops, so I never set foot in the things. That was when Games Workshop was a proper role-playing game shop, though. It was a real treasure trove in those days.
There's a new-ish kind of successor to Fighting Fantasy and Lone Wolf. There's the Fabled Lands series. The neat thing is that you can get them in paperback kind of book size, or you can get them in actual game, like large size format. So it's easier to read through them and mark your character sheet and stuff. But it's got several, like about 8 different books.
We could also play one of those on one of the streams.
What is that?
It's a solo Call of Cthulhu adventure. Choose your own path. I've got 3 of those. But these are all ideas for future. So
Fabled Lands is interesting because it's flexible enough to where if you want to just become a merchant in that game, you can. You can like travel the world and trade goods and earn gold.
I think there's a bit of flexibility in the sorcery series, from what I remember. Not massively, but compared to the Fighting Fantasy ones, I think there was. And I know that the one that the American Steve Jackson wrote that was in the series, something Swamp. Someone mentioned it in one of the comments on my video. That one was like a hex crawl, and it played out like a hex crawl. That was something different as well. I can't remember the full name of it. I remember playing that. I never owned it, but I borrowed it from a friend. What used to happen is I had a group of about 4 or 5 friends, and one of us would buy one book and we'd share it around, and someone else would buy another book and we'd share it around. I bought about 7 or 8 in total. I haven't got all of them still, but
I had, I think, 20 of them. But of course, they were the small books that, and like you said, from bookshops. That's exactly where I went to buy all my stuff. And I was like, oh yeah, this is really cool. I get to do the role-playing thing without having to worry about all this other stuff. So yeah.
Dave, you've still got all the sorcery books. Yeah. Excellent. the different covers in the US, there've been 3 or 4 issues of them, and there's certainly been at least 3 different covers for some of them because different publishers have had hold of them and they've reissued them. And there's been a hardback version of Warlock of Firetop Mountain. There's been multiple re-releases of it, and they haven't reissued all of them. It's only the ones that were very popular, the classic ones, Death Trap Dungeon being one of them. I think Death Trap Dungeon would be a great one to play on the stream because it's so brutally hard and you'd all end up dying.
What was that the one? Was that like
Shadow.
number 5 or something?
Number 6.
6. Okay, because I remember doing that, but I also remember going through everything, and I would map everything in there. And if you took one wrong turn, you always die. I was like, that's kind of crappy. Anyway, but that's one of the reasons I like that. I'd still say do the Lone Wolf one as well because you aren't familiar with it, but it's HTML, so you could actually put it on the screen here to do it. I don't know if that has a PDF on it, but you could actually click through it, and it will actually take you to whichever section it is. It was the Project Aeon. I think I put a link in there. But that may work really well with you putting it on screen here as you go through it.
Now, I've never tried sharing my screen, so I don't know how messy that will be. but I don't have them on PDF.
No. The Lone Wolf ones are. You go to the website.
Oh,
and you go to Project Aeon. I think that's what it's called. Just mentioning it since it's something I loved, and there were books I never was able to do. It's like, I can just go online, but it's https://projectaeon.org, and they are allowed to do all of the Lone Wolf stuff. Before Joe Deaver died, he gave them authorization to print almost all of his stuff.
Excellent.
And so you can start from the very beginning. It's like a 12 series for the first set, which is playing Lone Wolf, and you can download it or you can just do it online. And you can.
If I don't make any videos next week, Omen Al's to blame.
Oh. well, it's kind of cool because you get to pick your magic skills and then your items, and then you have to start. Hopefully you'll get certain things as you go through. But I really enjoyed them as a kid. They were, and then I bought some of the books, and then I also, when Bundle of Holding had the rule set for it, I was like, oh, okay, we'll do it. Because Cubicle 7 was losing it, so they threw it on Bundle of Holding, so you get it for like $5 or whatever it is.
But I was looking at the prices of the Fighting Fantasy books yesterday on eBay, and you can get a few of them for about £3, including postage. That's in here in the UK. I don't know if you can get them the same sort of price in America, but at that price, it'd be rude not to build up the library and get half a dozen of them, because £3 a book, they're great fun. They are good fun, and if you just get an afternoon's entertainment, certainly Death Trap Dungeon, probably 4 days of frustration because it's so hard. But I think I failed on my first 2 runs through Warlock of Firetop Mountain, but I kept a map and I know which way I haven't gone, so the key has to be that way. The key I keep missing. So I know I'm going to complete it next time because the fights in it are quite straightforward.
My friend used to make fun of me because I had East and West reversed. So I had to go back and say, okay, I'll just flip it over. Because, yeah, you're right. I would draw out the little map and say, okay, we never go to this room. And then we can go left or right. I'll go to this room. And, yeah, I had the whole thing mapped out, including the monsters. So I think that's...
So the hardest part for Warlock of Firetop Mountain was just keeping track of the maze at the end. You had to be... There was a traditional old school maze which had little teleports in it, and as soon as you get your head around, when you're mapping it out, make just little notes of which numbers each passage goes to, and then you'll solve it. Then you'll solve it in no time. Once I'd cracked that, I got through it. But as I said, I hadn't got a key. I was missing a key. It was stupid.
Oh, what was that one with the? Yeah, you're right. That one, but some of them were just great ideas too. If nothing else, it's just I think that's something that I wish I think that a lot of these kids are missing things. Even the old Choose Your Own Adventure, which were just, they didn't have any of the, select this or select this, and you just flip through it. D&D had an equivalent too. I remember doing one where I was a monk.
Yeah, they were the Endless Quest books as well.
Yeah.
Rose Estes wrote a few of them, and I read them. I played a fighting fantasy book, then I tried to get hold of some of them. I found these Endless Quest books, and I got them and played them, but there were no dice involved, and they were much shorter, much simpler.
Yeah.
They were over in an hour or two. So I found that they were nice. They were probably better written in terms of the quality of the writing in place, mostly, but they were far too simplistic.
The fighting fantasy, and I think the Lone Wolf is the one I liked, because you take your character from book to book to book to book. And that's what I really liked, is because it had that whole role-playing industry. And so sometimes the book would say, did you have this item? And that item was from 3 books before.
The sorcery books series, the idea was it was one long series of 4 books in a row. And I had one of those, and it was massive. It was much bigger than the regular fighting fantasy ones. It took Dave Mills mentions the Endless Quest ones here. I think I only read the first couple. There was this one about the Snow Queen or something like that. There was one.
Hmm.
There was certainly one set in a frosty environment that I played. But the fighting fantasy books were all individual books, though you could, in theory, link Death Trap Dungeon and Trial of Champions together, because they were meant to be. One was meant to be a sequel to the other. They were separate. Yeah. Death Trap Dungeon was insanely hard, and as I said in my video on that, Trial of Champions was even worse. All the monsters in that, from what I remember, had high skill, high stamina. You weren't meant to beat them if you were fair with the dice, and it was brutally difficult.
Hey, just because I cheated to get through those, that doesn't reduce how much I still love them.
You had to cheat to get through a couple of them. You had to. One of the nice things about Warlock of Firetop Mountain is you don't have to cheat to get through it. It's a slow drip on your stamina and that. There's so many places to recover, and that's what's nice about the earlier ones. House of Hell was a good one as well.
Oh, was that the one that was? Yeah, I just remember I had gobbled all those up. There was another series which I can't remember where you played. The first ones were better because you didn't have to always die if you didn't solve it, but it actually had puzzles in it, and you'd have to draw it out to figure it out. But it was like you were space. But yeah, I enjoyed those things. That's what I was thinking about when we were talking about traps. They're aimed at 10 to 12-year-olds, and they're solvable. You just can't rush through them, and you'd have to sit through them. And I said, I still love those as it would be now, and they don't take that long, which was kind of nice. But it would make you stop, and you'd have to think, and you might have to draw stuff out, and like, well, that doesn't work. Let me go this way,
I said in the video that I think House of Hell would make a good Call of Cthulhu scenario. I'd never heard of Call of Cthulhu when I played it. I was probably 13 years old when I played it, and I'd never heard of Call of Cthulhu. I loved it. I absolutely loved House of Hell because it's got that same vibe to it. And I think when I first played Call of Cthulhu, I remember thinking to myself, this is like that House of Hell book. Whereas in reality, I think the inspiration was probably a little bit the other way around. But I think it was spooky, and there was some really gory artwork in it. but it had that correct atmosphere, and you had these evil cultists. And don't go in the kitchen if you do play that one. Do not go in the kitchen. There's horrible things in the kitchen.
Well, Michael Stronghold says, do you have your own channel? Well, the only thing on my channel right now is my son trying to beat up and I think his mother beating up a Trump pinata. But that was.
I say, Omen Al doesn't do his own videos. He just does everybody else's videos.
Well, part of it is that if you do your own video, you're expected to have a schedule and things like that. And then the other part is to be fair on everyone. I'll be honest, since I have I'm trying to farm a piece of land. If you're going to see, if I'm putting through my channel, it's going to deal not with role playing games. It's going to deal with like the trials of learning how to farm.
Fair enough. I mean,
well, because you guys are great. I mean, John, you did a great job as far as bringing back and bringing a, what does I want to call it? A clear vision of modules without the rose-colored glasses, which is really different than a lot of people that go through it. And you're very
he has objectivity.
Yeah, well, he does. I mean, a lot of things I love as a kid, and I look at, but I have to objectively go through and say, okay, I don't like this system. Much as I loved, Unearthed Arcana as a kid, looking back on it, it destroyed first edition as far as a lot of balancing aspects and things like that. And so I viewed it as a bad book because it did not improve the game. It actually made the game worse, even though everyone liked the options, was my general view. I mean, there were some additions, but that's why I do not like that book. And that's not necessarily fair. Other people love those options, but that's one of the reasons that I look at Basic as a superior game. So you have to remove yourself from that. Like I said, I still love Star Frontiers. Is Traveler better? I don't know. I haven't played Traveler. It looks like it's a simple system. It depends whether you like 2D6 or you like D100s. I like the aliens in there, but I don't really like the Imperium world of Traveler. Yeah, and I agree with Dave Mills. It was an obvious cash grab, but you know what? So was Dragon Magazine. They took all the stuff from Dragon Magazine that they liked and they threw it in Unearthed Arcana. Because I had those.
Looking back now at Unearthed Arcana, with a bit of maturity and a bit of experience behind us, we can now pick out the bits that are good, and there are some decent bits in there, but you have to cast aside and be objective and say, right, that bit will not help the game. That bit will. I can add that bit, but we'll push. Don't like that. We'll push that away. And it's not a book that's good for beginners in any way. Even kids. When I was a teenager. Yeah, you're right. It broke the game, but we wanted all the cool new stuff back then. But nowadays, it's like, okay, I'll take the bits I like. I'll take the bits on social class. I'll expand out the race and class options because it doesn't break the game.
I didn't mind comeliness that much. I think, though, is it really overpowered elves. I mean, when you really look at it, it vastly overpowered elves. And I think that there's, again, it'd be one of those things that it wasn't necessarily bad. I liked social class. I liked the fact they threw in cantrips. They threw in the gods. I enjoyed a lot of those aspects. But when they went wrong in a bad way. And it was supposed to be a certain part, we'll go do full plate, and then we'll start having full plate reduced damage. I'm like, okay, now you're mixing armor class and damage reduction, which they hadn't done before. And there's a lot of that. And the yes, having elves overpowered are bad things. Well, it does when everyone wants to play an elf because now they can charm everybody. And to be fair on this is where UA we're seeing in 5th edition. Oh, we want to make sure that we throw in all these character classes, and it does make it hard now for a DM because now they have to do the power, which has happened somewhat in 2. In the 1st edition, the players were expected to get the player's handbook. That was it. Yes. And the DM was expected to get everything else. And that was fine for what was going on. Now, we all bought different stuff, and almost all my friends had the Monster Manual Dungeon Master's Guide. They may not have
probably ran games themselves.
Oriental Adventures. I mean, that was probably one of the everyone loved that one. So whenever I hear that, and I like
not anymore.
Me and James talking about, well, you know what? The only people who don't like it are the ones who never played it. That's what amazes me. Because I hate saying this is when you're doing Oriental Adventures, they're like, well, I didn't feel represented. You're Asian. Do you know how many of us all decided to play Asians and that we're not Asian? I mean, all my friends are like, yes, we'll play the samurai. Oh, we'll go through the typical Ran and 7 Samurai. But I agree with James. OSE, I'm waiting for those books to come in, and I like the fact that I like the little hardback ones because I can hand the players their spell book and their character book, and they can share that among the table, and then I can have the treasure and the monsters and everything else. So I like that from that aspect. But
I will say I like it when elves are able to charm everything when they're the bad guys. Because in L&D, elves are not your friends. They charm you just by looking at you. They have Stormbringer swords. They have blasting ones, which are like magic missile wands. They have magical armor. It's not fun. They're really bad people.
in my homebrewed game world that I was running alongside my Call of Cthulhu game, because we alternated a little bit, what we played quite often. Elves weren't even a playable race; they were bad guys. I butchered them and changed them for the world. And elves were savage. They had.
Yep.
I like the elves when they're more of the, what do I call it, unseelie, fey aspect, rather than.
Oh God. Yeah. Fairies are deadly, and they are dangerous, and they are not your friend. They never are.
Symbaroum, I think, does a very good job of portraying elves like that, and I like that background for it. But they have the regular player's guide, then they have the advanced player's guide, and I think it's not that I'm against having an advanced player's guide, but that requires a different level of maturity for players, and I think the problem really comes down to, for a lot of games, is the players are not mature enough to go for the advanced aspects where they can role play the negatives and things, including GMs for this. It becomes just a massive powerhouse. And you go, okay, look, these advanced options make your character that much better than the basic.
That's one of the reasons the Cavalier class was criticized for Earth Arcana, in that players, if you let that stuff loose on inexperienced players and kids, they wouldn't role play the drawbacks of the class. Now, I would allow a Cavalier in a first edition game, but that player would probably not survive. That character would probably not survive first level, because that player would be playing all those drawbacks, including the one where you cannot run away and you will run straight at the biggest, baddest guy, because that's the heroic thing to do.
Well, didn't they start at 0 level? But then they got like twice as many hit points, and that's
and they had to be lawful and all this other stuff. Yeah, there was a lot of baggage, but they did get a lot of good shit, like a horse and better plate and stuff. But Mar Hawkman, if you want to play a Mongolian, check out Sword and Caravan by RPG Pundit. There's a class where you get to play like basically the different tribal people, like the Uyghurs, the Mongolians. There's a bunch of different steppe people that you get to play as, these mounted warriors. It's really good. I'd recommend it.
If you play Middle-earth role-playing, you can play the part of an Easterling.
Right.
And they are good on horseback. And they are based on Mongolian tribesmen.
Hopefully people won't get angry. That's one of the things that I thought that this Amazon thing with Lord of the Rings messed up on, is they should have gone, instead of focusing on the main characters, they should have gone to a different section like the Southerners and the Easterlings, and showed the fall of them to Sauron or something of that sort. And you could have done, because there's a lot that's in background for that is never fleshed out. You don't have to worry about destroying canon. You have a free box. You can do all your diversity aspects. Man, you could have done that. People would have been like, "Ooh, it's something new. I'm going to watch this because I don't know about it."
I'd have watched that.
You've made the mistake. Omen, you've made the very critical mistake in that you think they give a fuck about honoring Tolkien. They want to destroy him. They released it on the anniversary of his death. They want to destroy him and everything that he stood for, man.
Well, I know, but that's the thing that's getting me about everything. It doesn't matter what it is. It's you have good stories. You could do everything in there, and instead of trying to take existing IP and work in your own and then bring a new one, boy, it's you could have done so much, and I would have been like, oh yeah, I would love to watch that. I would love to see, because apparently they were fighting with the Gondorians as well. So now you get something that you can do. You can do that kind of political aspect along with having the variety. And I hate saying this, I still love Mamelukes. I don't care. The elephants That's what I want to see more.
I'm actually of the opposite opinion, where I'm like, no, I want them to. Here's the thing. Here's where I'm actually going to say something that people don't want to hear. I want them to make more of the Lord of the Rings. I want them to ruin Tolkien's legacy because I want them to fail. I want them to show their utter contempt and hatred for everything we love so that people thoroughly reject them and they lose billions of dollars and their company dies. Because I want to send the clear message that this shit will not be tolerated and we will not give them our money and they are going to learn the hard way. And when we, the customer, go, daddy spanks your naughty little bottom, and you are going to learn the lesson the fucking hard way. This is what needs to happen. This is what needs to happen. If we want Peter Jackson style Lord of the Rings again, these people have to get hit in the fucking head financially and learn that this type of destruction of what we love will not be tolerated anymore. I'm going full Macedonian phalanx on them against their Greek shield wall. They are going to get slaughtered. I am done with this.
I'm just not watching it. If I want to,
I'm not watching it either.
I'm not watching it either.
I'll put the Peter Jackson films on, or I'll listen to an audiobook of the original works. It's as simple as that. Anyway, has any of you? A quick question from Halakar here. Are familiar with the YouTube channel Storied?
I'm not familiar with it.
No, I'm not. But did he say something earlier? It's got good monster mythology. Something about getting a PhD in monsters in literature. I'm going to make it when work's quiet tomorrow. That's going to go on my playlist of work tomorrow.
I feel the chat is reacting mostly positively to my rant. It has been too long since this live stream has had a DK rant, and I am filling my quota.
Yes, when I first started the channel, DK did play the part of bad cop, and it had the desired effect of stirring up in it.
Look,
quieter.
And Elfbait, if you like the show, that's fine. I am not saying you can't enjoy it. I'm saying this is a mode of principle. I see the problems of the show just in the advertising, right? And the intent of the showrunners and their actors are doing, and I find it to be distasteful because it's been going like this for the last 10 years, and I'm getting tired of it. I want stories to be good. And this, to me, is going to be bad. And the fact they're sinking $1 billion into it, and they're going to have multiple seasons, means they are going to fail and fail badly, and I want them to fail.
Yeah.
What I've seen I've tried to seek out objective reviews rather than sensationalist reviews on it. And the general feeling I've got from people who are being objective is that they've put too much emphasis on making it look pretty and not enough on making it feel enough Tolkien-like and cohesive. I've seen people pick some big holes in the stories, how it seems illogical in places. A friend of mine who is a big Tolkien nerd says he doesn't mind those hot potato issues of race swapping and all that sort of stuff. All he wanted to see was consistency, and he isn't seeing consistency. And that's he isn't seeing what he reads in Tolkien, and he isn't seeing consistency. And in terms of the quality of the cast, in terms of the actors who've been chosen, in terms of the dialogue, he says it feels. And he's just it is that lack of consistency that's causing the problem.
I mean, I know people complain some about Dune where it didn't bother me, where they did Leto Kynes, but you could tell that they tried keeping the flavor and everything else in there. And I've said, okay, fine, I don't really care about this much. Everyone's like, I want 100% pure. It's two different mediums. I don't need 100%. All these people doing it, but I do want good story. I want you to follow through some of it. And the other part is, like you're talking about, is if I am not familiar at all with the story whatsoever, I still want it to encourage me to go seek out those books at a future point.
Yeah, of course.
And that's,
Yep.
like Conan. I love the movie, but I go back and read the books. I'm like, oh, I appreciate what's coming up from that Pulp Fiction. And the other part is it's written at a higher level than what you would think. And this was, what amazes me is these were books that were given out to kids and stuff. And so they were all reading them. The same thing for D&D is, the idea that somehow we have to, I know that they all talk about High Gygaxian. It never bothered me. If I didn't know what the word was, I would look it up. I love looking up things. What is
So
it?
did I.
Like, what is charisma? What is, let me go, that's what charisma is. What is comeliness? Look up the definition. The same thing with vampire, with all of these big words in there only made it better to me rather than, this is not a speech. How do I want to put this? Simple words are for to explain simple concepts in certain ways, and you want to get your point across. But when you're reading a rule book, I also want to sit down, read the book for enjoyment and fun, and have my mind wander and just enjoy the same thing. And when you're talking about MERP, talking about these Fighting Fantasy level books, I bought all of those little books that I could find as well, and say, oh, look, I get to have a character, and I get to play in the world that I know. Oh, we're going to Mirkwood this time, or I'm going over here. I get to play an elf, and that. The other thing is that those books are easily accessible for very young adults, or the 8 to 12 or whatever you're looking at. Those will bring those people into our hobby, and the better they're written and the more engaging they are, then the people will say, oh, I got to play this in this game, but now I get to create my own story. And they'll evolve into that as well. And that's what I would like to see. I don't, yeah, exactly. I learned a lot of English through D&D, Grumpy Old Slave. Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I've said before, because I have concentration issues, I haven't sat and read a book for years and years and years and years and years because the internet is there and shiny, and I get lost sort of browsing nonsense.
Plus, movies are better.
But I also don't watch a lot of films. But playing Call of Cthulhu has led me to seek out Lovecraft stuff on audiobook. And I've listened to probably now about a third of the books, the stories that he wrote on audiobook because of Call of Cthulhu. It's made me interested in the original source material. And I can respect, I have a lot of respect. I had a lot of respect for the Call of Cthulhu game anyway, because I thoroughly enjoyed it, thoroughly enjoyed the way it all worked. But now, having listened to these books, it's made me a better Call of Cthulhu keeper. I've got a better sense of how to pace things and how to present things, and I've got a greater respect for the lore. And I like to be tempted in. I like that now. To be tempted into finding out about, like you say, about the original work that it's based on. You want, if you've got a film based on Tolkien, you want people watching that film to pick up the book or listen to an audiobook afterwards and be intrigued to find out where it's all come from. And
I, for one, would never have even considered reading Lord of the Rings had it not been for Peter Jackson's books or Peter Jackson's films. Like not the Hobbit. Like that was a bit, but I have said this many times. Not only do I think that the Lord of the Rings trilogy is one of the greatest movie adaptations of a book ever, I think it is the greatest trilogy that has ever or will ever be made. I don't think, at least for 100 years, anything will even close to topping it. It is so well paced, so well written, so well acted, so well written, so consistent to the source material, and so it honors it so much.
Yeah, I mean, yes, they changed a few bits. They left a few bits out. But you're absolutely right. It was made from a place of love. It was made from a place of respect. The actors, the producers, the writers, you could tell from watching those films that they loved the source material.
Man, whenever Theoden does the death speech outside of Gondor, my heart swells. Every time Sam speaks, I'm like, oh, it's so good. I fucking loved.
Well, and I went to the movie theater for the first one, and I had to sit through it because you have such expectations after reading the book. And to be fair, the cartoons what sucked me in. I read the cartoons originally, then I read the book when I was a little bit older for The Hobbit, and then I read Lord of the Rings. So then, of course, I'm coming back, when I'm almost 30, and I'm watching it. I'm going, how are they going to screw this up? How are they going to screw this up? And I said, okay, it isn't perfect, but it's as close as we're going to get, and I accepted that. And then the second time I watched it, I could really enjoy it. And then when they came out with the extended editions, are so much better.
They're so good.
But I had to, and this was why I liked it, was we'd watch 2 hours, and because Tolkien did split the books in half, you can stop it. It has good stopping points. You can go make food or whatever else, and you can come back and you can sit and watch it again.
I actually am annoyed that the Blu-ray versions of the extended version I have is that they cut the film in half and you have to swap discs. I would much rather if like the extra stuff was on one of the discs and the whole film was on one. You know what I mean? But it's whatever. It's
Well, I think mine came with 4 DVDs in it. To be fair, so it didn't just.
Mine came with like 12, I think.
Well, no, I don't mean all of. I mean that was for each one, and you did.
Yeah.
It was 2 hours for half of the movie, 2 hours for the next half, and then 2 hours for the extra, and then another 2 hours for the extras behind that. For each one.
Yeah.
So,
man, I binged. Man, I once binged all 3 of the extended films in a day. It was the best 12 hours of my life. It was so good. Oh, God.
Oh, it got better here because some of the movie theaters here, I say here, they were down in Austin. They decided to do a continuous, all 3 movies, the extended editions at the theater. I would have to go pee at some point, let alone, and I think it was at Alamo Draft House, which you may not be familiar with. They bring the food to you. So while you're sitting there, you order the food, and the food's
nice.
They'll bring it right to you, and it's hot, and it's not bad food. It's actually pretty decent. So I really enjoyed that. So,
one thing to think about with the films as well is, I know AB has said that he if he's still listening, but he hasn't watched the films. I'm guessing it's because he read the books and loves the books and knows that the films do deviate a little. In my opinion, they had to make the films slightly different because they were there to entertain a cinema audience, many of whom will not have read the books. So they've got to focus on the faster moving parts of the storyline that are more easily digestible for the non-nerds in the audience. Yes, those of us who have read the books and love those little all those other bits and pieces that are in the books that are not in the films. The films weren't specifically there for us; they were there for everyone. So they had to make concessions.
I've heard a YouTuber, I don't remember off the top of my head, but he said his brother would not watch the films because Tom Bombadil wasn't in it. And I'm like, there is a very good reason why Tom Bombadil isn't in that film. And there's a very good reason, because the villain of the films is not Sauron, it's the Ring. And Tom Bombadil is immune to the effects of the Ring. He can put it on and nothing happens to him. And I think it would kind of undermine the entire struggle of the film if you meet a character who can just put the damn thing on, and audiences would go, why doesn't he just take it to Mount Doom? Why do they have to go on the, it's...
The question of Tom Bombadil is something that Tolkien fans have argued about and discussed for ever since the books came out. And when you watch a series of films, you want to come away from the last film with the answers. And I think that if you'd have had the Tom Bombadil aspect in there, people would have still been discussing that and possibly,
So I'm not disagreeing with about Tom Bombadil, but I had one person. This was years before the movie came out. All the reason there was Tom Bombadil in the Whites is because he had to break up 50 pages of boring exposition. And I said, yeah, I'm not disagreeing with that, but it is hard to get through that first 50 pages for me because I really don't.
Can be, yeah.
Well, and I'll be honest, I've read it multiple times, and the first time I read through the whole thing, and the second time I said, you know what, I don't care about the hobbits, so I read the whole Fellowship, and then I didn't care about Frodo and Sam, so then I read all of the Aragorn stuff twice, so I could get through it. And I think that there's that aspect. The other part I always hated, which I'm glad that he did this, because I felt so cheated when I read the books, is he's going through and then it says, and he marries Arwen. I'm like, who the hell is Arwen? What is she doing? It made no sense. You're supposed to marry Eowyn. That makes much more sense, and I still think that way anyway. I understand where he wanted his love of that, but I think that it would have meant a lot more is that, the humans are the ones that really saved Middle Earth at the end as the elves were leaving Middle Earth.
The fact that people think that elves from Tolkien are like these good and graceful and wholesome people, the elves in like the Legendarium as a whole throughout their entire history before Tolkien kind of fanboyed over them towards the end of his life, they were morally depraved scumfucks. Like, they were not good people. In the start of their lives, they were warring savages who ripped each other apart, and at the end of it were just sad and just abandoned humanity to their fate. Like, they're not good people. They might have good intentions sometimes, but if you're going to say that the fault lies in the hearts of men, elves have done way more harm, like by nautical miles. It's like,
but the point was, it's a time of man, and to me that was that was the point that really bothered me. Of like the first age is really the time of the elves and things like that. Just is humans and men are coming together, and by the third age, the elves are leaving, and the humans are the ones that are left to fight off Sauron. And at the end of that is the fourth age, where basically everyone becomes human anyway, as the halflings get taller and stuff. And
because aren't the halflings considered the cousins of men anyway? I think so. In one of his letters, they're considered, because they're near the human realms anyway, because like Bree is like right on top of the Shire, so it's like,
fourth age epic module.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
I've never run it. I would love to run it one day.
I know Tolkien was contemplating doing a sequel when virtually all magic was gone from well, not virtually, but a lot of it was gone, and there was like hints at a dark power, but he never released it. And I think his reasoning was that there was no real point.
I heard something where you may have talked to. I mean, it's fun listening to all the stuff now but I tried getting through the Silmarillion. I got bored. I couldn't. That was a hard read. My friend loved it, but I'm like, no, I can't deal with this. And I think at the end is the work that was done by Iron Crown Enterprises on the Tolkien stuff to flesh out areas that Tolkien had not. And by my understanding, they gave him a lot of leeway, has really improved that. And that's one of the reasons why when we're mentioning about it is, and I'm not going to worry about the politics, I'm just saying from a story standpoint, if they had focused on the South, that would have allowed them to do everything that they could have done, allowed them to build stories and characters that are vaguely mentioned without destroying any canon. You don't have to, it gives you a whole playground to play with a world that's there that we could say, oh, it's a new section, they're bringing it out, and we can enjoy it as well. So, yeah.
Right. Anyway, you know what time it is.
We've gone past 12.
Yes, we've gone past midnight. You've all taken me past my bedtime. And I'm not going to go on for 2 hours late.
Okay. Yeah. So yes, blame Omenal for the whole thing. It's always Omenal's fault.
It's always Omenal's fault. You are officially the scapegoat. No, but once again, I want to thank everybody who's been involved in the stream tonight. Elfbait and Graham have now logged off, but Omanal, DK, thanks for joining me tonight. We've had a marvelous discussion. We've dug into other things in the last 45 minutes, but isn't that what the end of a stream is exactly for? And chat once again. Chat have been chuntering away again as they should, giving us things to talk about, which is great. I I am going to say now, I want to say thank you for everybody who has helped me develop my channel to way beyond what I ever expected. I feel very lucky to have people such as yourselves, everyone who joins in with such people, intelligent people who care about what they're talking about and can offer perspectives in a wide variety of perspectives in a I was going to say diplomatic way, but we have had a DK rant tonight. that doesn't matter. But everyone explains themselves so well and in such an engaging way, and I think it's great. I feel genuinely thankful for all of you. So thank you everyone in chat. Thanks to DM James for that super chat earlier. That's only the third super chat I've ever had, which is very nice. And Major's Musings, get off your backside and make another video. I want to see. Yes. I want to see what happens to your evil party. I don't care so much about the good guys. Yeah, they're perfectly pleasant, but it's. I want to see more of Ace-Eric, sorry, and I want to hear his descriptions of what Bob, the sadistic dwarf, gets up to.
You know what, John, what I
that?
would like to hear is, and I know I don't know how much time it is, but I would love to hear, while you tell your stories, and I had a friend that actually records his stuff, it'd be very interesting to hear you as a narrator for how the players did during your game. Instead of what I mean by that is a lot of times people try doing the live play, which has a lot of dead time and talk and stuff like that. But it would be very interesting to hear 15 or 20 minutes of just as a storytelling aspect of what went on in the game. Of we have, if you know what I'm talking about with that, it's just description characters.
Any game in particular?
Whatever you're playing. I mean, I enjoyed your U1, U2, U3 review, and it sounds awesome for that. But all too often, people are doing 4-hour live streams, which there's a lot of dead time and things like that. But it would have been awfully nice, and I've heard some people do it where they do just a voice narration talking about what the players had done and the in a heroic style, writing style kind of thing.
Well, once I finished my third group going through Forget-Me-Not, the Call of Cthulhu scenario, I do plan to do, it is the first product I ever gave a 10 out of 10 to. And I plan to revisit it and discuss the ways in which the three groups that I've run through it approached different aspects of it and how the game itself turned out differently as a result of their various approaches. That's one thing I am going to be doing in a video. I don't know how much depth I'm going to be able to go into because one group went through it a couple of years ago, but I meant as an actual storyteller kind of aspect of it's of course I know
let's not derail this too much, Omanal, because we're already pushing past Geek's bedtime.
I certainly want to do a thorough recap of what the Thursday night group have been up to, because I think that the way they've approached it and what has happened to them will make a very entertaining story. And I'm sure General Nuts here at the moment and Major's Musings, they're both playing in it, and I'm sure they would agree that it's been amusing. It comes across as if they've enjoyed the game, and I've certainly enjoyed running them through it. And it will end. It'd be sad to end it on Thursday, but it will almost certainly end on Thursday. There's not much left in the scenario that they can do, the state they're in at the moment. But it's tomorrow night. We'll see how it goes. But I obviously can't record a recap of that until my Saturday lot played it, because I don't want to give things away. And I know Gingerbeard has signed up for that. And I know there's Legbreaker who's in the Discord. He's Australian, so he can't join in the what we do at the moment. He's maybe asleep. He's signed up for that. And if anyone else who is in chat wants to play Call of Cthulhu on Saturday, you're more than welcome to come along. We start at 2 p.m. UK time, planning to play for 3 or 4 hours fortnightly on Saturdays. And there are currently 3 spare characters up for grabs. We're playing on Discord only. There's no need for anything else. And come along, join in, and I'm sure Major's Musings and General Nut, well, you can see from their responses here, they're enjoying it. So
I would love to join. I just have things to do that day, unfortunately. So,
well, what do you mean? Unfortunately, you're going to Ramstein, aren't you?
Well, yeah, that's what I mean. It's one of those things like, well, I got to choose 2. I can only choose 1. So you're like, yeah, I mean, that's great. Well, for me, that works great because I'd rather do stuff early in the morning than in the evening.
Yeah. So. But obviously, but equally though, Ramstein is only one weekend. The way this scenario works, you could easily join for the second session.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
When is that one?
It would be 2 weeks afterwards.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And I'm not going to, well, there is a very good reason why, and General Nut and Major's Musings will know exactly what that reason why is. So if we do have 4 players for the session and there'll be a spare character left over, you're more than welcome to come and join us for that, for the one in a fortnight's time.
Oh, that'd be great. So
okay. And it won't matter that you've missed the first session because the way the mechanics of that scenario work.
All right, I'd love to do that.
Anyhow, it is now 20 past midnight.
Yeah.
And Dave Mills has finished by saying "Du hast," which of course is it's just disappeared, which of course is Rammstein's
one of the better songs.
I like Mein Herz brennt. I think they're.
I like Wiedmen Heil. I love Wiedmen Heil. The Hunters song. It's great. Fucking love that song.
Mein Herz brennt, the piano version. The video where he's all dressed up as the Candyman. It's magnificent. Nice. Absolutely magnificent.
But anyway. I will say, Geek, before you go, you said you were honored. I am blessed to have met you, Geek. I love you, man. You're great.
Thank you, DK. Thank you for involving me in your games and making me feel welcome in your games. So,
Jawohl!
Cheers all. Well, thank you all for the chat, and I'm going to be ending the broadcast. 3, 2, 1.
Bye.
Bye.